Good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is E.J. Kimball. I'm a senior fellow with the Center for a Secure Free Society. Welcome to our event today, commemorating the 25th anniversary of the horrific terrorist attack on the AMIA Jewish Cultural Center in Buenos Aires, carried out by Hezbollah in Iran. The importance of this anniversary and the implications of the continuing threat posed by the Iranian regime and its proxy Hezbollah to the Jewish community in Argentina and the entire region is why we are here today. All of our speakers have worked towards achieving justice for the victims of the attack and against those responsible for carrying it out. Last Thursday in Buenos Aires, Argentina commemorated the AMIA anniversary, and the government of Argentina announced its designation of Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. Hezbollah was the terrorist group responsible for the most American deaths before 9/11 and is responsible for carrying out the largest terrorist attack in the history of Argentina and all of Latin America. Now, for some, this designation of Hezbollah is long overdue, but most do not realize the significance of Argentina's action. This is the first designation of Hezbollah in Latin America as a terrorist organization. We at SFS are thankful for the role that we have been able to play in helping to raise awareness and coordinate with various interested parties on the need to designate Hezbollah in Argentina and throughout Latin America. Our event today is entitled Improving Regional Counterterrorism Cooperation in the Wake of a Tragedy. 2 years ago, we at SFS organized a high-level event here on Capitol Hill on the 23rd anniversary of the AMIA bombing, focused on the need to strengthen anti-terrorism legal frameworks in Latin America. We had prosecutors and judges from Brazil, Peru, Chile, and elsewhere to discuss this issue in great detail, and that event helped get us here today. We have an impressive lineup of speakers who will unpack the recent actions by the United States and Argentine governments and how to continue advancing efforts to secure Latin America, the Jewish community, and the United States from the threat posed by Iran and Hezbollah. Now, the Trump administration has spent a lot of time and resources engaging Latin America to address the threat from terrorist organizations at a more robust level than previous administrations have. The Treasury and Justice Departments have taken the lead with aggressive action against Hezbollah. On Friday last week, the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control announced the designation of Salman Rauf Salman, a senior member of Hezbollah's external security organization, responsible for coordinating the attack on the AMIA and additional terrorist operations in the Western Hemisphere. In January of 2018, then Attorney General Sessions announced the creation of the Hezbollah Financing and Narcoterrorism Team to investigate individuals and networks supporting Hezbollah. In October of last year, then Attorney General Sessions named Hezbollah one of the 5 priority organizations for the Transnational Organized Crime Task Force. And on May 17th this year, a jury returned a guilty verdict against Ali Karani for carrying out covert terrorist activities in the United States on behalf of Hezbollah. He'll be sentenced in September. We at SFS are now in the process of helping to create a new counterterrorism and counter-transnational organized crime task force in Congress to work with our allies in Latin America on a bilateral and multilateral level, with special attention to Hezbollah's illicit activities in the region. In fact, last August, I was able to travel to Argentina with Joseph Humeyer, the executive director of SFS, to engage in discussions with senior officials within the Argentine Congress to begin this process. Now, the work that we've been doing at SFS has expanded in both our breadth and effectiveness. Our new international fellow from Brazil, Leonardo Coutinho, published a best-selling book with evidence of Iran and Hezbollah's ties to Venezuela, Bolivia, and other anti-American and anti-Israel nation states. Now, before I turn the podium over to my colleague, let me just highlight a few additional things that SFS has done under the leadership of Joseph. Now, Joseph is considered to be the top subject matter expert on Iran and Hezbollah's influence in Latin America within parts of the counterterrorism, defense, and intel community in the U.S. And in fact, Joseph created a conceptual model on Iran's modus operandi in Latin America that is now referred to as the Humeyer model within the intel community. Joseph has provided more than a half dozen testimonies before Congress, including the Committees on Financial Services, Foreign Affairs, and Homeland Security, raising awareness as to Iran's and Hezbollah's malign influence in the region, and the legal vacuum in Latin America on anti-terrorism. He's taken dozens of trips to the region, particularly to Argentina, to work with policymakers and to raise awareness of Iran and Hezbollah's presence, and has worked with counterterrorism officials on advancing various Hezbollah cases, including the AMIA case, Alberto Nisman's murder, and the illegal MOU between the previous Kirchner government of Argentina and Iran. In 2016, he published the groundbreaking report, After Nisman, which we have copies outside, on how Iran and Hezbollah benefited from the murder of AMIA prosecutor Alberto Nisman, which was based on an analysis of over 40,000 wiretaps made public from Nisman's last investigation in 2015 on Christina Kirchner's backdoor deals with Iran that led to the MOU. This report and its contents have been submitted to Argentine authorities as evidence in various ongoing legal cases. Please join me in welcoming SFS Executive Director Joseph Humeyer.
Well, first and foremost, good morning. It's truly an honor to be with everybody here today, such a distinguished audience for an important day. Actually, the important day was last week, but we're going to acknowledge it. We're going to be here in memory of it today. I know Washington isn't the nicest place to be on late July, hot and humid, but everybody made it, and I think that's important. As EJ mentioned, my name is Joseph Humeyer. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Secure Free Society. We are a relatively new, next-generation national security think tank. We focus on what the Defense Department calls trans-regional threat networks, meaning networks that exist far abroad, as far as Asia, Middle East, Africa, but what permeates into our neighborhood, which is the Western Hemisphere. We take our findings in our research and we present it before policymakers all throughout the Americas, as far south as Argentina, in Colombia, and obviously here in the United States as well. I was in Buenos Aires very recently. I was in Buenos Aires last week, and it was probably one of the most impactful moments of my life to be on Pasteur Street, which is the street where the AMIA headquarters is located, on July 18th in 2019. And just seeing, for those that weren't there, there's a few of us, I think, that are in the audience that were there, but for those that weren't there, just to see the amount of people that came to commemorate this probably one of Argentina's worst days, to see the emotion out of many of the people that were in the audience and just in the crowd, and more importantly, to see the emotion of the people that were talking, representatives from the AMIA, the mother and the daughter of the late prosecutor Alberto Nisman. It was impossible not to feel how important this is. This really was the September 11th for Argentina, and I truly understood that better than ever when I was there last week. And I think that's more than, obviously more than the speakers, the impressive lineup of speakers and all of us, more than all that, I think what brings us here today, especially our impressive representation from the diplomatic corps, is the significance of what is the AMIA attack, which when I was there in Buenos Aires last week, when I was there on Pasteur Street, it kind of entered my mind that this really is more than an attack on Argentina. This was an attack on the entire Western Hemisphere. Before the AMIA attack, no one believed Hezbollah operated outside of their near abroad in Lebanon or northern part of Israel. Actually, I remember many counterterrorism analysts said that that's impossible. Hezbollah has no targets on the other side of the world. There is no logic to those attacks. But as we found out through the investigations, through the prosecution, well, not the prosecution, through the investigation and the prosecutors of the AMIA attack, that's not the case. Hezbollah is very much entrenched back in the 80s, in the 90s, in Latin America, and to this day, that has not gone away. It's only grown significantly more. In many ways, what happened in the 80s and 90s in Argentina is connected to 9/11. The networks that operate in our side of the world, in our hemisphere, whether they're networks that engage fundamentally in terrorism or nowadays engage more in transnational organized crime, has become a convergence of just illicit actors that are moving south, north, east, west. And as these networks manifested and grew in size, in power, and capacity, it woke up the United States on that morning at 8:46 a.m. when we here in Washington and New York understood the significance of Islamic terrorism front and center. But as I mentioned, I don't believe it's the tragedy that brings us together. It's really the perseverance, the courage of those that continue to seek truth, that continue to seek justice, and to always remember the victims of these tragic terror attacks. So when I stood there in Buenos Aires on Pasteur Street, I thought essentially of all of you. I thought of everybody that I've met in the last decade or so, and all this time that I've been researching and looking into these issues, that in one way or another has helped get us to a point that in Latin America we're starting to have a serious conversation about Hezbollah and Iran. Matter of fact, everybody that's going to speak before us today, a very impressive lineup of speakers. I'm going to speak about the agenda in a second. In one way or another, has worked on this issue, some with SFS, other with other groups and other think tanks, and has helped establish a conscious and an awareness of what happened in 1994 and what's taken from 1994 to 2019 to be able to get to today, where we actually have a major action on Hezbollah on behalf of the Argentine government. I'd like to publicly acknowledge President Macri, his entire national security team, and particularly the Ministry of Security, the Financial Intelligence Unit, and also their Congress, for their leadership on this. One of the arguments I would hear a lot of times when I was in other countries in Latin America, and the number one argument that you would hear was, this is not our threat. You know, this Hezbollah, Iran, even Al-Qaeda, Daesh, these are threats for other countries. They may come here, they may launder money, they may pass through, but they're not targeting us. Well, the Argentines knew that wasn't the case. But what they would do is they would constantly say, you know, we would rather be a hub than a target. And they would point to Argentina. They say, listen, if Argentina doesn't even acknowledge this, and they were bombed, then what's to say that any other country, Brazil, Colombia, Peru, needs to acknowledge that Hezbollah is a threat? And frankly, they were right. In Argentina, for a long time, they just didn't want to talk about this for various reasons, you know, political reasons, specific technical reasons. But that changed under the leadership of President Mauricio Macri. And from day one, actually, there was conversations about doing this, and it just needed the right people in the right place to understand how to do this. And we have some of those people with us here today. Congressman Luis Petri, who was instrumental in making this happen, led the path forward, along with all the other ministers, the Minister Patricia Bullrich from the Ministry of Security, the President of the Financial Intelligence Unit, Mariano Federici, individuals that knew that if we just study this the right way and we find the right path, what was once considered politically impossible in Latin America will become politically inevitable. And I believe that to be the case in every country in Latin America, which is why I'm honored really to have such an impressive and distinguished audience representation from the diplomatic corps of 15 embassies are with us today, including Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, Mexico, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Panama, Poland, Hungary, the Netherlands, Montenegro, Namibia, Afghanistan, and of course, I'd like to especially acknowledge Ambassador Fernando Oriz de Roa, who, if he's not here, the ambassador is with us today. Thank you, Ambassador, for gracing us with your presence today. I know this is a very important event and a very busy schedule for yourself as well. It's truly an honor to have all of you here, this wide range of international recognition on this important anniversary. So you'll hear from me later. I'll be on one of the panels, but what I would like to do now is just talk a little bit about the format of the event as we wait for Senator Cruz to come and join us. So this is a packed event. So I've been accused of being too much what for the when, in the sense that we have 3 hours, right? So we have going to be in this room for 3 hours. I don't know if any of you have seen an Avengers movie, but essentially it's going to be somewhat like that in the sense that we're not going to take breaks because we want to give panelists ample time to give their message. If you need to take a break, if you need to get up, get a glass of water, a cup of coffee, everything's in the back. Bathrooms are on the right and left. I think the women's bathroom is on the right if you get out the exit, and then the men's bathroom on the left. So feel free to obviously you're all grown adults, feel free to take a break when you need it. However, we're going to push through this agenda pretty aggressively. We're going to start with 3 speakers, very distinguished individuals that have a lot to share on this particular topic. Senator Cruz will be our first speaker. He needs no introduction. My colleague EJ will introduce him in a second once he arrives. But he's going to give his remarks from the congressional side, from the Senate side, on what this means, not just the AMIA, but also efforts against Hezbollah and Iran and their networks in Latin America. Then we're honored to be joined by a good friend and an important gentleman in all the efforts that have been bridging Latin America with Israel and the United States, Malcolm Hoenlein, who is the Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations, who actually flew in from New York to join us today. So I'm very, very honored that he's been able to be with us. He has a very busy schedule, but Malcolm and I have been talking about these threats both on his radio program on the John Batchelor Show every Thursday evening, but also just in private for many, many years. Then we will have Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division of the Department of Justice, Mr. John Cronin, who John has been, a lot of us talk about this problem, right? We get involved, we're think tanks, right? We sit around, we discuss and we dialogue, but John's a prosecutor, so Don does more than talking. He finds these individuals, he prosecutes them, he convicts them. EJ mentioned the Karani case that was an ongoing case of a Hezbollah ESO, Unit 910 operative that was actually in New York. He wasn't very far away, that was arrested and detained, charged, and as of, I believe, April of this past year, convicted on terrorism charges. There are other individuals like him and part of the same network, and John's going to talk to us about the Department of Justice's effort in this initiative, in this effort. And then we're going to switch to panels. The first panel is going to be colleagues of mine that we've worked very closely together. Ilan Berman, who I see in the back, who me and Ilan took early trips to Latin America going back to 2012, where he can vouch for some of the reactions from some of my friends in Latin America about talking about Hezbollah and Iran and potential designations back in that day from the American Foreign Policy Council. Selena Rey Aluyo, who was just with, I was just with her actually in Buenos Aires, Argentina, who works at the Perry Center and National Defense University, and who has a long history. I mean, going back to right after September 11th about the tri-border area and the efforts that we were looking at combating the illicit finance of terror networks. And I was with Selena last week in Buenos Aires, and I remember we commented that, if it's kind of a shocking moment for me to think that we got to a point where we have a designation of Hezbollah in Latin America, it would be twice as shocking for Selena, who's been working on it for twice as long as I have. And we'll be moderated by my good friend Leah Soibel, who's doing great work through her organization Fuente Latina to take the message of the threat of international terrorism and Islamist terrorism to Latin America in Spanish and Portuguese, to be able to make sure that the public understands and has conscience of these threats. So that'll be a first panel. It'll be a discussion. It'll be about regional cooperation, the way forward, what can we do to strengthen both our technical abilities, but also make sure the public understands that this is a problem, not just in the United States here, but also in Latin America, where sometimes these things seem very foreign. Then we finally, and I do very much encourage you to stay for the entire program, because the last panel really, to me, is the most important panel in some ways, because first and foremost, because we will have Congressman Luis Petri. So as far as all of us have come today to be with us this morning, nobody's come further than Congressman Petri, who took a flight from Argentina to be able to be with us. As I mentioned before, he'll get a more lengthy introduction as we approach the event, as his panel. However, he is the single most important political actor in Argentina that made sure that the process for this designation of Hezbollah took place. He had the full, complete trust of President Macri. He worked hand in glove with the ministers that were involved, from the Foreign Ministry to the Security Ministry to the Justice Ministry and others. And he is also a leading figure in the Argentine National Congress. So he is going to speak firsthand about how this happened, which in the United States, in Washington, this has not been told yet. We have not explained how this has taken place, which is probably about, it's been going on for years, but probably about the last 6-7 months is really where things started begun to heat up. And we have two important individuals from here in the U.S. Congress that have been involved in this for many years. First is Congressman Robert Pittenger, who started something called the Parliamentary Intelligence Security Forum, which he's now the chairman of this. They moved it, it's become its own nonprofit organization. But the Parliamentary Intelligence Security Forum is essentially a network. The first time Robert invited me to one of these forums in 2017, I believe, was actually in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And not coincidentally, Congressman Pittenger, myself, Congressman Petri, Congressman Eduardo Amadeo, another important congressman from Argentina, sat on a panel together and talked specifically about this moment, about the day that we can come, that we can actually have the legal mechanisms to combat terrorism. And so Congressman Pittenger has been gracious to join us today. I know he's a friend of many in the audience, a friend of many in the diplomatic corps, and is continuing to do these forums worldwide. I think the most recent one was in France in June, a month or so ago, and is continuing to do others both in Europe and the Middle East and hopefully in Latin America as well. And then last but certainly not least is Congressman Jeff Duncan. My first testimony, congressional testimony ever, was in 2013. And in fact, I was supposed to be an alternate to the hearing because the primary witness was Alberto Nisman. If you remember, Alberto Nisman was invited by Congressman Jeff Duncan to testify before the House Homeland Security Committee and was asked to give his findings in a recently released report, which was another report from Nisman in 2013, where he talked about the network. He talked about the same network that attacked Hezbollah has only grown and was, according to his report, active in 8 countries in South America and the Caribbean. So Nisman was invited by the Congressman Jeff Duncan in the Congress of the United States. Unfortunately, the president at the time of Argentina, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, blocked him from coming, made sure that he was not allowed to come. So I was, as they call in baseball, I was the pinch hitter. I came in to testify in the place of Alberto Nisman, but it was before Congressman Duncan in his hearing, and he actually achieved, I think, I might be wrong about this, but I think it's the only piece of legislation to this date in the Congress that actually specifically addresses the threat of Iran and Hezbollah in the Western Hemisphere. It actually mandated the State Department to write a report about the activities and presence of Iran and Hezbollah. I don't believe it's an annual report. I think it was a one-time report, which they eventually published in, I believe, 2015. Nevertheless, Congressman Duncan will be here. He'll join us later. Very gracious with his presence. And then our senior fellow, Hugo Cha, from SFS, who's an expert on transnational organized crime, will be with us to moderate that panel. So as you can tell, it's a lot of what for the when. But I very much encourage everybody to stay to the end because I think that's going to be where we're going to learn a lot more about the specific nature of the congressional legislative actions that took place. Now, as we wait for Senator Cruz, let me talk a little bit about some things in the center and kind of in a shameless self-promotion. As EJ mentioned, we have a report outside for those that want to take it. It's called After Nisman. I highly encourage you to take the report. It's also online on our website, securefreesociety.org, both available in English and in Spanish. The English and Spanish version do differ a little bit. The Spanish version was written specifically for the government of Argentina to be able to be presented to some of the prosecutors in several legal cases that are manifesting themselves related to the AMIA, related to the MOU, related to Nisman's death. So we have copies of that outside. There's another product I'd like to plug, which is a new product for SFS. It's actually a term that we're coining at the center. It's called the VRIC monitor, VRIC monitor. And what the VRIC stands for, it's not what you think. It's not the BRIC, which is the Goldman Sachs term for emerging markets of Brazil, Russia, India, China. We played off that term, and we created something called the VRIC, because I believe that's the real alliance, more on intelligence and security, of Venezuela, Russia, Iran, and China. And so what the VRIC monitor does is it compiles open source reporting month to month on the presence of these external and extra-regional actors in Latin America and reports it out every month. So you can subscribe to that on our website. It's a digital product that will be emailed to your inbox every month. And I think it's another way to kind of further inform folks as to some of these trans-regional threat networks. We are also going to be publishing this year a lengthy report, monograph, on Hezbollah's crime terror network in Latin America. It's an investigation we've been engaged in, well, really forever, but really the last year and a half, where we've gotten very specific information, which includes Hezbollah's presence in Venezuela, it includes Hezbollah's presence in Bolivia, and it'll include, obviously, the most historic part of Hezbollah's network in the tri-border area. My colleague Leonardo Coutinho, who's our international fellow from Brazil, will join me in authoring that report. And then lastly, I believe the senator is here. Lastly, I invite everybody to follow us on Facebook, like us on Twitter. You have the Instagram. You have all the website URLs, hashtags, domains up on this banner. We constantly are coming up with new products and new materials, so we're very much looking forward to stay engaged. This is not the end of this conversation on Iran, Hezbollah in the Western Hemisphere. This is very much the beginning of a serious conversation that's taking place in Latin America and that will also take place here in Washington, D.C. With that, the senator's here, so I will turn it over to E.J. Kimball, who will introduce Senator Cruz.
We are honored to be joined today by Senator Ted Cruz and look forward to his keynote remarks. We at SFS have worked closely with Senator Cruz and his staff, briefing them regularly on developments in Latin America. Senator Cruz has been a leader in combating the malign role of extra-regional actors in our hemisphere, specifically dealing with Iran and its proxy Hezbollah. Senator Ted Cruz represents 28 million Texans in the U.S. Senate as a passionate fighter for limited government and economic growth. He has authored 39 legislative measures signed into law. Recent victories include leading the effort to repeal Obamacare's individual mandate, imposing sanctions on terrorists who use civilians as human shields, designating North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism, and leading the fight to confirm principled constitutionalists to our courts. Senator Cruz is a graduate of Princeton University and Harvard Law School, a former law clerk to Chief Justice William Rehnquist, and former Solicitor General of Texas. He has argued 9 cases before the Supreme Court, and in November of 2018, he was reelected to the Senate by the people of Texas. Senator Cruz currently sits on the Senate Foreign Relations and Judiciary committees. Along with Senator Marsha Blackburn, Senator Cruz sent a letter to Secretary Pompeo to urge Paraguay and Brazil to follow Argentina's lead and designate Hezbollah. Senator Cruz has made amendments to the NDAA year after year to have DOD focus on the trans-regional threats from hostile regimes abroad in Argentina, Venezuela, and elsewhere in Latin America. And finally, in commemoration of the 25th anniversary of the bombing of the AMIA, Senator Cruz joined with Senator Menendez and his colleagues in a bipartisan resolution remembering the attack and to recommit efforts to uphold justice for the victims. Please join me in welcoming Senator Ted Cruz.
Good morning, and thank you very much. Thank you to everyone here at SFS for standing up for security and standing up for freedom. These are fights, the stakes of which are enormous, and they are battles that make an enormous difference, not just in the United States, but across the globe. Thank you for having me here to discuss this very important topic. The AMIA bombing and where we are dealing with Hezbollah 25 years after that horrific attack. On July 18th, 1994, at 9:53 in the morning, a Hezbollah suicide bomber drove a bomb into the Jewish Community Center in downtown Buenos Aires. The blast murdered 85 innocent people and injured 300. It is to this day the deadliest terror attack that Argentina has ever seen. This was not the first time that Hezbollah had targeted and killed Jews in Argentina. 2 years before the AMIA attack, on March 17, 1992, Hezbollah bombed the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, murdering 29 people and injuring 242. To this day, the terrorists who committed these atrocious acts have never faced justice. Last week, along with my Senate colleagues, I introduced a resolution remembering the 25th anniversary of the AMIA bombing. The resolution also urges President Trump to monitor Iran's activities in the Western Hemisphere and to assist the government of Argentina in supporting its ongoing investigation into the death of Argentine prosecutor Alberto Nisman, who investigated the attack and who was murdered in 2015, a matter of hours before he was going to publicly report his findings. The AMIA bombing was not the first or the last terror attack carried out by Hezbollah in Latin America or around the world. And yet, over 2 decades after the bombing, Hezbollah is still very much alive and active in the tri-border area that encompasses the borders of Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay. The growth of Hezbollah in Latin America remains unchecked. I commend Argentina for blacklisting Hezbollah, the first Latin American country to do so. President Macri has said this month that Argentina will be moving forward in declaring Hezbollah a terrorist organization. I sincerely hope that happens, and happens soon. And I hope that other Latin American countries, particularly Paraguay and Brazil, will soon follow in identifying Hezbollah for what it is, a profoundly dangerous terrorist organization. Last week, I sent a letter to Secretary Pompeo encouraging him to urge his Brazilian and Paraguayan counterparts to acknowledge Hezbollah's significance in their home countries and the terror that Hezbollah perpetuates within their borders. 25 years after the AMIA bombing, Hezbollah continues to radicalize people in Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil through mosques and schools that preach the group's extremist agenda. It's time for Latin America to reckon with the significant and the dangerous presence of Hezbollah in the region. And it's also time for the larger international community to combat Iran's proxies wherever we find them, in Latin America and in the Middle East. There has been some progress. President Trump rightly pulled out of the disastrous Obama-Iran nuclear deal, which was a devil's bargain and foolhardy from its inception. The Obama administration had greased the nuclear deal with bribes and secret agreements, including a side deal to allow Iran to inspect itself. There was a ransom deal that gave Iran $1.7 billion in cash in unmarked bills flown in pallets in the dead of night. And there were several wire transfers from America to Iran ranging from $1 to $10 million. The Obama administration subordinated the American financial system and American law to the deal. And they were willing to put the U.S. dollar and U.S. banks to work moving money for the Iranians. Luckily, those actions have come to light. And through President Trump's leadership, we have pulled out of this disastrous deal. But there is much more work to do. In order to keep Iran in check, we need to support our allies, especially Israel, and combat Iran's proxies in Lebanon, Latin America, and around the world. When the Ayatollah says, death to America and death to Israel, I believe him. Just 8 months ago, in December of 2018, Israel uncovered 6 sophisticated cross-border tunnels built by Hezbollah in South Lebanon, which included stairs, a rail system, and wide passageways allowing for the movement of equipment and forces intended to cause substantial harm to Israeli civilians by enabling terrorists to sneak across the border and carry out murderous attacks. Last month, I introduced the Countering Hezbollah in Lebanon's Military Act of 2019, which would withhold 20% of the U.S. military assistance to the Lebanese Armed Forces, the LAF, unless the president can certify that they're taking necessary steps to end Hezbollah's and Iran's influence over the LAF. United States Security Council Resolution 1701 required the Lebanese armed forces to disarm Hezbollah. And the United States gives military assistance to Lebanon to enforce that resolution. Last year, I secured language requiring an evaluation of whether the resolution was being implemented. And now it's time to take the next step and to reassess the assistance that we provide if Iran continues to exert direct influence on the LAF, either directly or through Hezbollah. The international community has failed to hold Hezbollah accountable. But the United States needs to send a message that we will not turn a blind eye to terrorists or their war crimes. Argentina should fight for justice for the victims of Hezbollah's horrific terror act 25 years ago. And the United States should assist them in doing so. And I will continue doing everything I can in the Senate to keep Iran in check, to ensure that maximum pressure means maximum pressure, and to ensure that under no circumstances ever does the Ayatollah Khamenei, with his theocratic, maniacal chant of death to America and death to Israel, that never will the Ayatollah acquire nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Thank you again very much to Senator Ted Cruz for all his leadership here in the United States Congress and the United States Senate, for his leadership with the Trump administration, and his leadership in Latin America. Most of the folks that are here in Washington know of Senator Cruz's efforts in the Middle East policy realm, of his efforts in global international security. But many few perhaps don't know that every year, as a member of the Armed Services Committee, Senator Cruz introduces an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act to be able to track Iranian, Hezbollah, Russia, China influence in the Western Hemisphere. So he's been very active on this for a long time, and I consider him one of the most knowledgeable and proactive leaders in the Senate on this. So very, very delighted that he was able to join us. Let me introduce our next speaker. Just rolling right along. As I mentioned before, is John Cronin, who's the Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. He was the acting Assistant Attorney General from November 2017 to July 2018. And in his current role, he participates in the supervision of the criminal divisions, more than 600 attorneys. In addition, in January 2018, former Attorney General Jeff Sessions appointed John to lead the Hezbollah financing and narco-terrorism team. This was an effort to reestablish the legal cases and the legal effort against Hezbollah's illicit network worldwide. Obviously, much of that takes place in Latin America. And to coordinate Department of Justice efforts to target and dismantle Hezbollah support networks. Previously, John supervised the Terrorism and International Narcotics Unit of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York and was a federal prosecutor. John graduated from Georgetown University and Yale Law School and clerked for Judges Robert A. Katzman and Barrington D. Parker on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. John was actually in Buenos Aires not too long ago, about a month or so ago, working with 7 or 8 countries in Latin America that got together in Buenos Aires for a workshop specifically on just Hezbollah's illicit networks. That was unheard of many years ago. I mean, you might have had a panel, a discussion, a presentation on Hezbollah, but to have a 2-day workshop just dedicated to this network with the participation of many countries in the region was unheard of, and I believe the Department of Justice has been very active on all this. So we're going to hear from John right now. Thank you again, John, for being with us today. Please welcome me in welcoming John Cronin.
Good morning, and thank you, Joseph, for that very kind introduction. But more importantly, thank you for all the tremendous work that you do in support of the mission, and especially for putting together this incredibly important and distinguished dialogue today. It is an honor to speak with you on behalf of the United States Department of Justice as we commemorate the horrible bombing of the AMIA Jewish Cultural Center in Buenos Aires and honor those who lost their lives on that tragic day. In 2019, the public safety threats that we face are more complex and transnational than ever. And as we all know, the threat that Hezbollah in particular continues to pose is a very real one. To be best positioned to dismantle Hezbollah's support networks and neutralize terrorist actions against U.S. interests, it is essential that we work productively with our international partners. That is why the theme of today's conference of international cooperation and securing justice for victims is so important and timely. Prior to my current position, I supervised the National Security Unit at the Federal Prosecutor's Office in Manhattan. Time and time again, I saw that we are most effective in our fight against transnational crime when we work across borders. I prosecuted a UK-based terrorist leader who orchestrated acts of terrorism across the globe that directly impacted our country's national security. Some of the most valuable proof at trial came from searches conducted by British law enforcement and from evidence recovered in Pakistan. I prosecuted multiple international drug traffickers who were flooding our streets with poison. Our ability to neutralize and convict those traffickers was augmented by international assistance, such as judicially authorized wiretaps in foreign countries, foreign law enforcement officers who infiltrated drug organizations, and fruitful extradition relationships. And repeatedly, U.S. law enforcement has provided vital assistance to our foreign partners that has saved lives, whether by thwarting a terrorist plot or otherwise sharing our experience and expertise. And I continue to see the value of international cooperation in my current role. Most of the criminal divisions, over 600 attorneys, are located here in D.C., but many of them are stationed around the globe, including in regions where Hezbollah support networks thrive, such as the tri-border area. That international coverage is a practical necessity today. As economies become increasingly global, so too are the terrorist and criminal schemes that we target. The challenges that we in law enforcement face are how to most effectively investigate and prosecute in this changing environment. How do we build a criminal case where the evidence and witnesses are located across the globe? How can we more effectively and efficiently track, lure, and extradite fugitives across borders? How can we prosecute cases in the public courtroom while protecting the equities of our intelligence services? And when criminal prosecution is not viable, how can we still disrupt and neutralize threats? There may be no criminal organization for which these challenges are more prevalent and acute than Hezbollah, whose global reach and violent ideology imperil the national security of the United States and our allies. To some extent, Hezbollah has avoided the global notoriety captured by the likes of al-Qaeda and ISIS, thanks largely to sophistication and secrecy of its activities. But Hezbollah's ability to evade regular front-page headlines in no way diminishes the threat the terrorist organization poses. Hezbollah, which has been designated by the Secretary of State as a foreign terrorist organization since 1997, has long presented a grave threat to our national security. As E.J. Kimball mentioned, prior to 9/11, Hezbollah was responsible for more American deaths than any other foreign terrorist organization, dating back to the 1980s when Hezbollah executed multiple bombings of U.S. targets in Beirut, killing hundreds of Americans. And of course, as Senator Cruz mentioned, many of our allies have experienced Hezbollah's murderous brutality as well. Hezbollah's attack 25 years ago on the AMIA Community Center left 85 innocent people dead and hundreds injured, and marked the second deadly attack by Hezbollah in Buenos Aires within a 2.5-year period. As Joseph mentioned, back in June, I had the privilege of participating in a multi-day workshop in Buenos Aires on disrupting Hezbollah's terrorist activities, and that was with many of our Western Hemisphere partners. It was a pretty historic event. While there, I had the opportunity to visit the AMIA Center and saw the very moving and powerful memorial to the victims. It's fitting that just last week, coinciding with the 25th anniversary of the AMIA bombing, Argentina took the historic step of officially designating Hezbollah as a foreign terrorist organization. That designation marks the first terrorist designation of Hezbollah in Latin America and sends a clear and unequivocal message that there is no ambiguity whatsoever when it comes to whether or not Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. And again, we hope that other Latin American countries will now follow Argentina's lead and join in designating Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. And still today, 25 years removed from the AMIA attacks, Hezbollah has not strayed at all from its willingness to resort to violence across the globe to achieve its aims. Iran remains the world's leading sponsor of terrorism and continues to engage in terrorism-related and destabilizing activities through Hezbollah. In its most recent country reports on terrorism issued last September, the State Department noted that Iran and Hezbollah are emerging from the conflict in Syria emboldened with valuable battlefield experience that they seek to leverage across the globe. According to that report, Iran has provided hundreds of millions of dollars in support of Hezbollah and has trained thousands of Hezbollah's fighters at camps in Iran. Thanks largely to receiving such sizable financial support, Hezbollah remains one of the world's most dangerous and capable terrorist organizations, having amassed a massive stockpile of weapons, and Hezbollah continues to plot terrorist attack activities across the globe. Countering Hezbollah's threat is a priority for this Department of Justice. And I want to take a few moments to speak a little bit about some of the work we are doing. As Joseph mentioned, in January of 2018, then Attorney General Jeff Sessions created the Hezbollah Financing and Narco-Terrorism Team, or the HFNT, and asked me to lead that team. The decision to stand up the HFNT reflected a recognition of the ongoing, sophisticated, and global threat posed by Hezbollah to the United States, and also that this threat demands an aggressive and coordinated law enforcement response. Through the HFNT, we are vigorously embracing that coordinated and aggressive response by working to bring to justice those who provide any support to Hezbollah, financial support, manpower, weapons, or otherwise. We have adopted a multi-pronged, all-of-the-above approach, which has entailed coordination among federal prosecutors and investigators across the country, exploration of non-terrorism charges where appropriate to neutralize Hezbollah support, coordination among various agencies of the U.S. government, and close collaboration with our foreign counterparts. This interagency effort has been a tremendous success. Now, obviously and unfortunately, I cannot discuss publicly the majority of the work that we have done and we are doing, but let me give just a few examples of what this work has entailed. First, we have been facilitating and ensuring coordination among the various law enforcement officers and prosecutors who are targeting Hezbollah and its support networks. Now, when multiple prosecutors in different offices across the country are looking at the same threat, there is risk that individual investigations will be siloed. But in the face of a complex and sophisticated threat like Hezbollah, prosecutors must be in sync, and they must support each other's efforts. Through the HFNT, we are ensuring that that is happening. We have been meeting with prosecutors and law enforcement officers across the country to ensure that they are sharing evidence, sharing witnesses, sharing information, and that their Hezbollah-related investigations and prosecutions are being prioritized, are moving expeditiously, and are supported by sufficient resources. And our prosecutions are having a powerful impact. Just about 2 years ago, we in the United States received a sobering reminder of the ongoing threat that Hezbollah continues to pose when 2 alleged trained Hezbollah operatives on U.S. soil were arrested. In June 2017, Samarel Debek and Ali Karani were arrested for providing material support to Hezbollah, and their alleged conduct is nothing short of bone-chilling. Both defendants allegedly joined Hezbollah's External Security Organization, or ESO, which is the branch of Hezbollah responsible for planning, coordinating, and executing terrorist attacks outside of Lebanon. They allegedly received extensive military training from Hezbollah, received taskings from Hezbollah, and resided in the United States essentially to be sleeper operatives waiting for assignments from their Hezbollah handlers. Now, I'm able to go into a little bit more detail as to the conduct of Ali Karani because he was convicted after a public trial in Manhattan in May, and much of his criminal conduct was laid bare in a U.S. courtroom. Karani received over a decade of training from Hezbollah, including training in tradecraft, military tactics, and advanced weapons such as AK-47 rifles and rocket launchers. Starting in 2003, Karani began to act as a sleeper operative in the United States. At the direction of his ESO handler, Karani then naturalized in 2009 and later obtained a U.S. passport. And while on U.S. soil, Karani engaged with covert communications with his ESO handler and performed numerous taskings for Hezbollah. He conducted physical surveillance on multiple targets in New York City, including a federal office building where the FBI is located, a U.S. Army National Guard facility and an armory, and a U.S. Secret Service facility. Karani was also tasked to collect evidence on security features and layouts at airports. He provided detailed information to his ESO handler regarding specific security protocols, baggage screening, and the location of surveillance cameras, security personnel, law enforcement officers, and magnetometers at JFK Airport and at another international airport in another country. Karani's trial and his conviction on all counts left no doubt as to the gravity of the threat we'd continue to face from Hezbollah and as to Hezbollah's sophistication in deploying its trained operatives. Cutting off Hezbollah's financial support also has been central to our efforts. Money is the lifeblood of any terrorist organization, and Hezbollah is no different. On the prosecution side, this focus on cutting off Hezbollah's finances was reflected in our recent conviction of Qasim Tajuddin. Tajuddin, who presided over a multi-billion-dollar commodities shipping empire, was sanctioned by the U.S. Department of Treasury for being a significant financial contributor to Hezbollah. This past December, Tajani pled guilty to money laundering, a conspiracy in connection with his violation of those sanctions, and he has agreed to forfeit to the United States government approximately $50 million. Through the HFNT, we also have been closely working with other agencies to ensure maximum disruption to Hezbollah's financial support networks. Probably the best example is the work being done by the Department of Treasury. The efforts of the Department of Treasury to dismantle Hezbollah support networks have been extraordinary and historic. Since 2017, Treasury has sanctioned over 50 Hezbollah-related individuals and entities. Last year, Treasury issued more Hezbollah-related designations than in any year since the inception of its primary counterterrorism authority. These designations have a powerful impact on Hezbollah's financial support networks. A Treasury designation freezes any assets of the designated person or entity that are based in the U.S. or in the possession or control of U.S. persons, and generally prohibits U.S. persons from engaging in any transactions with the designated person or entity. And on top of that, the designations allow for an avenue of prosecution if the sanctions are violated. Treasury has designated various members of Hezbollah's Shura Council, including Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah's highest-ranking official, as well as multiple individuals who have allegedly provided key support to Hezbollah, including a Hezbollah financier named Mohammed Ibrahim Bazi, Hezbollah's ambassador to Iran, Abdallah Safi al-Din, Adam Hussein Tabaja, a Hezbollah financier with direct ties to senior Hezbollah officials and the ESO, and Mohammed Abdallah al-Amin for providing material support to Tabaja. Treasury also recently designated 2 Hezbollah members of Lebanese parliament for using their political office for illicit and criminal activity. And as EJ mentioned, just last week, Treasury designated another key Hezbollah leader named Salman Rauf Salman. Salman allegedly played a key prominent role in the AMIA Senate bombings. He also allegedly is a leader of Hezbollah's ESO and directs and supports terrorist activities in the Western Hemisphere. On the same day of the Treasury designation, the U.S. Department of State announced a reward of $7 million for information leading to Salman's identification or location. And lastly, we have also been working closely with our foreign partners in our shared mission against Hezbollah. For example, the U.S. government has provided assistance to Peruvian authorities in their ongoing retrial of alleged Hezbollah operative Mohammed Hamdar. Prosecutors at the Department of Justice have developed considerable experience in national security prosecutions, and we are eager to share those experiences and assist our international partners in any way we can. In December, I had the privilege of participating in a Western Hemisphere counterterrorism ministerial on the Hezbollah threat at the Department of State with 11 key international partners. That ministerial culminated with the release of a joint communique outlining a plan to improve cooperation in countering terrorism financing, as well as to improve law enforcement capacity, information sharing, and border security. And last week in Argentina, our colleagues in Argentina hosted a follow-on ministerial that was attended by senior members of the administration. These ministerials have highlighted the importance of strengthening regional counterterrorism capabilities and enhancing cooperation. Those are things we need to be constantly thinking about. How can we work even better with our partners across the globe? How can we strengthen the capabilities of those partners? How can we collectively most powerfully combat the Hezbollah threat that we all face? As I mentioned before, much of the work that we have been doing at the Department of Justice just simply cannot be discussed at this setting. Investigations may be covert, charges may be sealed, defendants may be cooperating, Hezbollah supporters may be facing non-terrorism charges as we work to build terrorism charges. But make no mistake, destroying Hezbollah support networks and neutralizing the Hezbollah threat is a top priority for this Department of Justice, and it will continue to be. Thank you very much for inviting me to join today, and I look forward to the rest of today's event.
Thank you for those remarks. It is now my honor to introduce our next speaker. Malcolm Hoenlein is the Executive Vice Chairman and CEO of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, the coordinating body for 53 national Jewish organizations. He received his BA from Temple University and completed his doctoral coursework at the University of Pennsylvania, where he taught international relations and was a Middle East specialist at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. He was the founding executive director of the JCRC of Greater New York and of the Greater New York Conference on Soviet Jewry. Mr. Hoenlein appears regularly in the media, has 3 weekly national radio broadcasts, and has lectured and met leading officials from around the world. He has received numerous awards from U.S. and foreign governments and institutions, including 4 honorary doctorates. Malcolm has been involved in Latin America for a long time and has prioritized the region even when the United States and the Jewish community has not been focused on it. Malcolm has helped push the region to understand the true nature of the Iranian regime and its proxy Hezbollah, ensuring that leaders in the political and Jewish communities understand the threat posed to their security interests. Malcolm has worked to unify the Jewish community in understanding the continuing and increasing threat from anti-Semitism and has been a leader in combating it. We're honored to have Malcolm Hoenlein here with us to provide keynote remarks in commemoration of the attack on the AMIA. Please join me in welcoming Malcolm Hoenlein.
When I got up this morning at 4 o'clock in New York, I felt that I became another victim of the AMIA attack. But when Joseph summons, you don't ask, you just come. In the same way that Joseph responds every time to every request, and he has been a friend and a mentor, and I'm proud to be able to say we work very closely together, and hopefully we have made a difference, and he certainly has been the leader on this issues and the related issues. Mr. Cronin, I want to thank the sponsors and everyone who made this possible. The question is, why do we remember? You know, Judaism puts special emphasis on remembrance. It's called Zechirah in Hebrew. The great commandments, the Sabbath, remembering the Exodus, are given in the context of remembrance. But remembrance isn't history. There's no Hebrew word for history. Remembrance is a dynamic process. You have to know what leads up to it, and you have to know what follows from it. It's not as if you're a reporter and say at that place, at that time, an incident took place. You have to know what are the causal factors and what are the results if you're going to recognize them in the future, if you're going to understand how to confront them. For us, history is about the future, because what we do today determines that future. What lessons we learn from the past helps us assure that future generations will have a more secure future. I was asked to talk about why the AMIA bombing remains so salient, why we remember it, why we talk about it. And I had the privilege to visit the site on several occasions, and we are in regular contact with the leaders of the AMIA and DAIA and others in the Jewish community in Argentina. So for us, these remembrances, recalling what happened, reliving it even, is essential because of our obligation to future generations. Winston Churchill once said, the further back you look, the further ahead you will see. Our sages said it 1,000 years earlier. But it is a critical lesson because the secrets of the past are the keys to the future. And only by understanding what really happened can we understand how we can prevent it in the future. Given the rise of anti-Semitism, of Jew hatred, extremism, terrorism. It makes it all the more important that we learn the lessons of the past, and in this case, the incomplete lessons. We learn from the mistakes and the successes, from the good and the evil. We learn the warning signs and recognize patterns. We learn how we must act and react, to hold to account perpetrators and their abettors, those who are directly involved in atrocities and those who support, who fuel, who cover for them, or refuse to take a stand against them. Why has the AMIA attack touched all of us, and so many, so deeply and sustained? The outrage around the world, despite the passage of 2.5 decades and the commemorations that have been held over the recent days. Certainly the magnitude of this barbaric act taking the worst toll of any attack in Latin America. But there was more. The attack was like an open laboratory of terror and hate, where we could see all the moving parts, the components and contributors, the failures before and after, the sabotage by officials and the media distortions, the diversions and cover-ups, all in full view of every open eye. From the top down, the never-ending experiment from which we can and must learn so much. It was a crucible in which the ingredients of death and destruction were mixed as many watched and many were silent. We must assure that no one escapes culpability. No one. Not then, not now, not in the future. The AMIA bombing resonates as it was the end of the age of deniability in Argentina, Latin America, and the world. As the attacks on the synagogues here in Pittsburgh and California were the end of the age of innocence for American Jews and America. No longer could anyone say they didn't know, as so many tried 70 years ago after the Holocaust. 85 martyrs, 11 dead in Pittsburgh. So many others testify to the contrary. By failing to act decisively 25 years ago, we gave Iran and Hezbollah a license to kill, and they have used it against countless innocent people. And they got a pass to incite, to recruit, to organize, to execute. And they did and continue to do so. The AMIA bombing did not give rise to the surge of anti-Semitism that we are witnessing, but it gave it new legitimacy and impetus. For its aftermath, a more blatant, open, virulent campaign with neo-Nazi parties in several countries emerging, and Iran spurned to widespread hate-filled campaigns on the internet, thousands of anti-Semitic actions and violations. Had the leadership then brought them to justice, maybe it would have been different. This was a pivotal event for Argentinian Jews, for Argentina, for diaspora communities of Jews around the world that saw the murderous anti-Semitism was a reality, and too many again turned a blind eye. Little was learned in the 6 decades by the world. Will they still continue to try to hide behind some false cloak of ignorance, as so many did after 1945? It wasn't that they didn't know, they did not want to know. The AMIA attack was a turning point in the declared ongoing war centered in Tehran, with other satellite capitals against the Jewish people, the Jewish faith, the Jewish religion, and the Jewish state, and others. It continues to take innocent victims in Israel and around the world. Many thought that Israel was ground zero for actions against Jews, for terrorism against Jews. But we see that others suffered attacks, but then it seemed always far away, somehow distant. Even perhaps the attack on the Israeli embassy was treated that way. The devastating sound of the explosion at AMIA brought the message to all. It can happen everywhere, and it is. All the rules changed. The psychology of a community, even of a country, changed. The reaction to the vicious, cowardly terrorism was a tsunami of emotion felt from New York to Jerusalem, from Paris to Miami, everywhere. It became a global event with long-term significance and implications. We see the extent of Iran's malign intent, and we see its extensive reach directly and through its subsidiaries. It shows that all are endangered by such terrorism, especially from a radical extremist regime that has global hegemonic designs and has no moral, legal, or political limits. Human rights, like human life, are mere obstacles for them that are easily dismissed or ignored, even in their own country. All of us have an obligation to help to continue the pursuit of justice, for the safety of all is at risk when these murderers are at large, especially when some occupy positions of importance and have a government behind them. We have to make sure that we urge everyone to join the battle against Jew hatred and anti-Semitism, against racism in all its forms, against terrorism, and against those who support it, against indifference above all. That is, in fact, the greatest danger that we face. While Jews are often the first victims, we're never the last. We see that in the words of Pastor Niemuller, whose very potent words remind us of it. Jews are often described as the canary in the mine, or the barometer for the conscience of mankind. I, for one, am sick and tired of the memorials for dead Jews, though I appreciate the intent of most. I'm tired of commemorations for Jews who were murdered, for destroyed Jewish communities. I want the world and its leaders to stand up for living Jews, for vibrant Jewish people, and a safe and vital Jewish state. No more crocodile tears, no more hollow pledges. We want to see clear declarations, clear actions, that never again has to become a meaningful pledge, that perpetrators will be held to account, as will their accomplices. Justice must be achieved. There can be no exceptions, no excuses. Before the next anniversary, I pray that many countries will follow the courageous example of President Mauricio Macri and declare Hezbollah a terrorist organization and apply sanctions. There is no exaggerating the importance of this decision, the first in South America, when too many exploit and are exploited by Hezbollah. It is a strong message at home and abroad and must be joined by others. First, by dropping the fictional distinction between a so-called political arm and a military wing of Hezbollah. They are one deadly machine, linked together. They are inextricable and have a leading state sponsor of terrorism in the world standing behind it. I take the threats of Iran seriously. I take the threats of Nasrallah seriously. Dictators tell the truth. Leaders of democracies lie, but dictators tell the truth, and we have to take their words seriously. Hitler told us what he would do, Stalin told us what he would do, but people didn't take it seriously. The words of Khamenei have to be taken seriously. He means it, and he seeks the means to do it. A unified front is essential. We have to stand together across all boundaries, geographic, religious, political, ideological, to ensure that they will ultimately face justice, that they will be put on notice, that we know that words of terror leads to acts of terror, that we will take their threats seriously, that we will act against them preemptively to make sure that they do not become a reality. We salute the announcement by the United States, by the Secretary of State, that the U.S. will provide additional funds, $7 million, to reward, to capture those responsible. It's not that we don't know who they are. Their names are known to all of you and to all of us. We know where they are. And for too long, they have been able to travel, to escape, because countries not willing to act We know Rafsanjani and Veliati and Rabbani and Vahidi. We know all of them. We know what they look like. We know where they go. And yet there isn't the courage to act against them. And we must, of course, acknowledge a hero of all of this in Mr. Nisman, whom I had the privilege to know and to meet and to host in New York. We remember this true hero in a saga that doesn't have many. And that Albert Nassimi, who paid with his life for his integrity and his unyielding commitment and for his involvement. Is there really a doubt what happened to him? Are we going to continue to let the fiction live? The price he paid for the readiness to expose the collusion of high government officials, law enforcement, judiciary, and others. No, there is no doubt, not in our minds. In 2013, we know Mr. Nassimi's 500-page report, which detailed the Iran terrorist network, would put him on notice and make him a target. These reports go back to events of over 20 years. And 2 years later, he released the results of the investigation alleging that President Fernandez de Kirchner and Foreign Minister Timmerman conspired to cover up Iran's role and agreed to negotiate immunity and to remove the red notices of Interpol on these Iranian leaders. No, we're not going to hide it anymore. Each of us has an obligation, if we care about the security of our children, of our grandchildren, and of all other children in the world, that there has to be action taken. Interpol has the red cards on them. They have to be exercised, and the governments, they've traveled to more than 20 countries, have to be ready to turn them over. No more excuses, no more exceptions. It is tragic that the families of those killed and those wounded should have been burdened and have suffered so long. Closure is denied to them. I pray, I appeal to all of you to make sure that we act now, as Joseph has done, as we heard from Senator Cruz, as we heard from the Department of Justice. No more excuses, no more exceptions.
Thank you, Malcolm. I'd now like to call up our first panel. I will briefly introduce our panelists. You've already met our first panelist, Joseph Humeyer, Executive Director of the Center for a Secure Free Society. To his left, we have Selena Realuyo, a professor of practice at the William J. Perry Center for Hemispheric Defense Studies at the National Defense University, where she focuses on U.S. national security, illicit networks, transnational organized crime, counterterrorism, cybersecurity, and anti-money laundering and counter-threat finance issues. As a former U.S. diplomat, international banker with Goldman Sachs, State Department Director of Counterterrorism Finance Programs, consultant and professor at the National Defense, George Washington, and Joint Special Operations Universities, she has 2 decades of international experience in the public, private, and academic sectors. Professor Realuyo is a regular commentator on global affairs for CNN in Espanol, Foreign Policy, Reuters, and Univision, and has testified before Congress on national security, terrorism, and crime issues. Our third panelist, to her left, is Ilan Berman, Senior Vice President of the American Foreign Policy Council in Washington, D.C. Ilan is an expert on regional security in the Middle East, Central Asia, and the Russian Federation. He's consulted for both the U.S. CIA and Department of Defense and provided assistance on foreign policy and national security issues to a range of governmental agencies and congressional offices. He's been called one of America's leading experts on the Middle East and Iran by CNN. Ilan is a frequent writer and commentator. He's written for the Wall Street Journal, Foreign Affairs, the New York Times, Foreign Policy, Washington Post, and USA Today, among many other publications. Ilan is the editor of 4 books, including Iran's Strategic Penetration of Latin America, which was co-edited with Joseph Humeyer, and the author of 4 others, most recently writing on Iran's Deadly Ambition, the Islamic Republic's Quest for Global Power. And our moderator for this panel is Leah Soibel. Leah has more than a decade of experience on the ground in Israel, the US, and Latin America, working with hundreds of global Latino journalists. In 2012, she founded Fuente Latina, headquartered in Miami with offices in Jerusalem, Madrid, and Los Angeles. Fuente Latina has brought 300 journalists to Israel, facilitated 35,000 accurate TV, radio, and print stories, reaching millions of Latinos worldwide, and their work has resulted in 2 TV Emmy wins and an AP Broadcasting Award. Leah's efforts in Latin America has led to a measurable shift in attitudes towards the world's only Jewish state, and this has helped push back against the anti-Semitic forces promoting false narratives about Israel and the Jewish community. So without further ado, I will now turn this over to Leah to begin our first panel.
Wonderful. Good morning, everybody. I just want to take 10 seconds while I have the moderator seat to say that it is quite incredible that this event is taking place today. I don't think we really realize the importance of it. It may seem that there are a lot of these types of events that take place on the Hill, but the fact that we are all here today, 1 week after Argentina finally blacklisted Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, given the work of the 3 distinguished panelists here today and many of the partners and individuals in this room, really is quite remarkable. And without much ado, I want to go straight into the questions because we don't have much time. So Joseph, I'm going to start with you. Now that we have Hezbollah designated in Argentina as a terrorist organization, what happens next? And what are the chances that other Latin American countries are now going to follow suit with that?
Okay, so that is really the key question, right? What's the way forward? What happens now? It took a lot to get here, but there's, I think, 3 things that we have to perhaps echo. One is we now have a clear path of how to do this. For a lot of time, Leah, you know this, and I know Selena and Ilan know this as well, that a lot of people in Latin America thought this was impossible, not just because of the political dynamics, but also technical. They didn't have the right legislation, there wasn't the legal framework, and so a lot of people thought technically this wasn't able to do as well. Many countries in Latin America thought that the UN list was sufficient to be able to mirror for their efforts to be able to go after terrorist groups. Hezbollah is not on the UN list. So I think now we have a path, both a political path and we have a technical path of how this is done in Argentina. Now, this is not going to be exactly the same in other countries in Latin America, but I think we have a kind of a roadmap on how to do this. The second thing is in Argentina specifically, and I'll let the representatives of Argentina speak more specifically on this, but I know that they have a registry. It now needs to be populated. Right? They need to put names in the registry. I know that's an ongoing effort. Obviously, there's a lot of Hezbollah facilitators, fixers, financiers that are implicated in the AMIA attack. I imagine many of those will go onto this registry that is now public in Argentina. But I imagine that it's going to be other governments in Latin America and in the world, really, that will help Argentina populate their list with knowledge of individuals and entities that are also operating in their countries that have a connection to Argentina. My understanding of the registry is that it has to have a local connection. It has to have a connection in Argentina to qualify to be on the list, but I know Congressman Petri will clarify all this for us. So I think those are the 2 things. One is we have a roadmap to do this. We have to help Argentina populate their registry so that this gets stronger. And then I'd say finally, and this is, for those that were at the ministerial, I know some people here that were at the ministerial last week in Buenos Aires. It was a very, very proud moment, obviously a historic moment. President Macri reserves a lot of the credit. Though I should say that there are certain governments in Latin America that still do not acknowledge that this is taking place. There are still some governments in Latin America that resist these efforts. Most notable, and it's no secret to anybody in the room, is the government of Venezuela, or the Maduro regime, as we more refer to it in here in Washington, is absolutely not going to play ball with any of this. I think the Morales government in Bolivia is right alongside with it. So there's going to be resistance in pockets of the region that definitely see this as an attack on them, because they have networks that intertwine with Hezbollah and other designated terror groups. So I think we're going to have to figure out a way through that as well. That's not to say that that's impossible, but I think that those countries, in many respects, have become enablers of these kind of networks, not just on the terrorist side, but also on the organized crime side. Hezbollah is well known as a transnational criminal organization, and they launder massive amounts of money. I think some analysts in Washington have called it the Western Union or the Federal Express for drug cartels in the region. So I think even on that front, I think we'll be able to make some headway. So.
And before I go on to the next panelist, which country do you think is going to be next?
That's a great question, right? I'm the worst at predicting anything, as anyone knows in my stock predictions. So I will I will say this, in the ministerial, the loudest voice, aside from Argentina, and I think the strongest arguments came from Colombia. And I do believe Colombia they're gonna host, I'm understanding, the next ministerial in January of next year, mid-January. And I believe Colombia has very much of the same, obviously not in AMIA didn't happen in Argentina, but they have a lot of the same technical capabilities. They're very professional counterterrorism officials in Colombia, both on the intelligence side, but also on the law enforcement side with their prosecutors and others. So I believe Colombia is a country that could potentially do this. Obviously, it's not going to happen on its own. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But I would look at then the other countries in the tri-border, Paraguay, Brazil. I'd hope that they would assume this challenge as well. I know that they have different obstacles in their countries. There's large Lebanese populations, and obviously the Lebanese population in itself is not being indicted here. There's a lot of honest and very good and productive contributors to society from those populations. So we have to figure out a way to not target everybody, and when you're looking at one group. But Colombia would be my guess. But again, you know my record in the stock market, so.
Thank you, Joseph. So, Selena, let's talk finance for a moment. There are a lot of articles that have actually come out recently saying that recent U.S. sanctions are having significant cash flow repercussions on Hezbollah. Number one, can you address that if it's true or not? And number two, regarding Argentina's designation of Hezbollah as a terrorist organization now, do you see any financial implications?
Sure. So first, I'd like to commend Joseph and his team for putting this event together. We were there on Thursday. It was a very moving experience to be at the AMIA commemoration. I've been following this since 2002. In the fall of 2002, when I was the coordinator for terrorist financing at the State Department, I was sent down to the tri-border to investigate a Vanity Fair piece that said Al-Qaeda had terror training camps in the tri-border. What did I discover? The Lebanese Hezbollah financing and support networks. And that's a major piece because many countries have objected because Hezbollah is technically a political party. They would always couch it in this, it's not an operational zone, it's more for fundraising and for support networks. But without those support networks, these terrorist groups cannot actually realize their nefarious agendas. So we take a look at the financing piece. And the other work that I've been doing is this concept of the convergence of terrorism and crime, and Hezbollah is a clear example, where they take advantage of their tentacles around the world that are involved in criminal networks, as well as the financing piece and the money laundering, particularly in terms of trafficking cocaine. The designation of Hezbollah in Argentina is very important, and now, as Joseph alluded to, we need to start helping them populate with the names of these financiers. As our colleague from the Justice Department, what wasn't touted is that we've actually accomplished several very important extraditions of narcotics traffickers and money launderers who we believe also have ties to financing Hezbollah out of the tri-border. This idea of naming and shaming them internationally, but we have to bring it to bear much more in terms of impact. First, to identify who the people are, then do the investigations. And this is where, because of the transnational nature, and many of these suspects are dual nationals, how you bring them to justice. And I know that the US government, because I've been involved in this, we're doing a lot of training with the tri-border nations to step up the game in terms of bringing these terrorist financiers and money launderers to justice. Because as was noted before, the money is the lifeblood for any terrorist organization. And I was delighted to see in the communique last Friday at the ministerial, there are several chapters that really focus on the role of financial intelligence units, and more importantly, how it has to be a much more active part of how we uncover, but more importantly, pursue not just the terrorists themselves, but those who finance and back them.
Thank you, Selena. And before I continue to Ilan, I just want to say we will be taking some questions from the audience. If you do have any questions, please put them down in the note card that was on your seat and raise your hand and somebody will come by and pick them up and we'll read them here at the end. So Ilan, Iran, the bigger picture. Let's get out of focus a little bit from Latin America and let's take a global view of this. What do you think are really the implications now of the designation in Argentina? Does it have any impact on Iran per se? What has been the feedback from Tehran?
Right. So I think that's a great question, and that's a good place to start in this conversation because you have to know where you were in order to know where you're going.
Exactly.
So as Joseph alluded to in his introductory remarks, he and I have been kicking around the region together for a long time. We started taking trips down there in 2012, and we were trying to essentially answer a very simple question, which is, to what extent had Iran penetrated Latin America as part of a strategy? So remember, historically at the time, Iran was being squeezed by multilateral and U.S. sanctions. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was the president of Iran. Certainly something resembling persona non grata in diplomatic circles. Iran was beginning to feel the pinch in a pretty substantial way in terms of its economic freedom of action. And so we were seeing all these telltale signs that this was translating into a greater Iranian forward presence in Latin America. The problem was that here in Washington, no one had bothered to go down and look. And so what you had was this scenario where some people said that this was simply fabricated, and some people said that the barbarians were within the gates. And there was really no objective ground truth. So we had this crazy idea that we would go down to places like Bolivia and Ecuador and Colombia and Argentina and so on and so forth, and take a look and see what was happening. And we found out that both sides were wrong, effectively. That Iran did have a strategy in the region, but it was an opportunistic strategy. It was one that was intended to circumvent US and European sanctions and essentially look at permissive financial environments in Latin America to try to sanctions bust. But also that it was beginning in a very real way to leverage relationships on an ideological level with, at that time, Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, with Rafael Correa in Ecuador, with others, to leverage the ALBA bloc, the Bolivarian Alliance of the Americas, in order to essentially create a footprint that it would have, that would be greater than it would have otherwise. And what's useful to remember here is that Iran at the time was talking about coming to our neighborhood because we were in theirs. Right? This was a time when the U.S. was much more heavily involved in on the ground, boots on the ground in Iraq, and the Iranians sort of made a signal that the Western Hemisphere was not off limits as a result. So fast forward all of this, more than half a decade, and what we're looking at is an Iran that is again feeling the squeeze from an international sanctions campaign. And let's be clear, it's international, right? The Trump administration is leading, the European allies and the Asian allies are balking, but they're slowly but surely they're coming around. And so Iran is increasingly feeling the pinch in much the same way that it was in 2011, 2012. And it stands to reason that Latin America, because not a whole lot has changed in Latin America in terms of financial rigidity, and Selena can talk to that more, but it's still, at least from the Iranian perspective, a permissive environment. There's two things to take away from all this. First of all, that Iran's penetration of Latin America is a long-term project. It was not something that started with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, although Ahmadinejad and Hugo Chavez had very good personal relations. It was something that Hassan Rouhani, the current Iranian president, has reaffirmed as a strategic goal. And it's also something that becomes more and more attractive to Iran as Iran feels squeezed again in terms of its ability to move around in in the international financial system. So while history does not repeat itself, very often history rhymes. And what we're looking at coming down the pike may be a resurgence of Iranian activity in Latin America, the same way that Joseph and I saw it in the beginning of the decade.
Great. Did anybody have any cards?
Do you want me to, can I add something?
Yeah, please.
So as we wait for questions from the audience, I want to maybe add a little bit to what Elon's saying, because as he mentioned, we have been working on this for quite a long time. Two things. One, just since we have a large contingent from the diplomatic corps of embassies here with us today, I want to perhaps speak to you. I understand the challenge of this. I've been working it for a very long time. And I want to make sure the public understands the challenge, both the public challenge and also the political challenge. For a long time, the connotation of the word terrorism in Latin America was very different to what we look at terrorism here in Washington. When we think of terrorism, particularly in a post-9/11 era, we think of Islamic terrorism, we think of international terrorism, we think of bombs, we think of non-state actors running around in establishing networks. But in Latin America, for a lot of countries, the connotation of the word terrorism had to do with state terrorism, governments abusing their powers and going after NGOs and civil society groups and violating human rights to be able to use their counterterrorism authorities in a way that actually would pursue civil society. There's periods of military dictatorships in Latin America in the 80s, 70s and 80s, and then there's periods, obviously, of abuse of government power. I don't think we're actually that far from that today. I mean, if you look at countries like Venezuela, I think you see some of that as well. You see the government calling people terrorists, they call political parties terrorist group, and they're fundamentally the opposition elements that are just trying to play a democratic game. So I think that connotation has not gone away. What happened in Argentina was very important. What happened in Argentina was very effective, but that doesn't mean that the Argentine population now thinks that terrorism is 100% their problem, or that it's all attributed to international groups, namely Hezbollah or Iran. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the public education side, on understanding that the public understands that these networks, I mean, just give you a little bit on Hezbollah. We look at Hezbollah and we think, okay, they're doing stuff in Lebanon, they're doing stuff in Syria, now, Yemen, Iraq, in tribe borders, the historic area. But here's what people don't know about Hezbollah. If anyone's familiar with the U.S. Army Green Berets, the Special Forces, right? What do the Special Forces do? They go to other countries and they train surrogate actors. They train indigenous groups. They train folks to fight battles with us, but not directly connected to us. That is the mandate of the U.S. Special Forces community. Hezbollah operates like the Special Forces of Iran, working with the Quds Force. There are groups today in Latin America that have nothing to do with Shia Islam. They have nothing to do with Iran's Islamic revolution. There are groups that were created mostly for domestic reasons and domestic grievances, but have been co-opted by Hezbollah. I'll name a few of these groups. The Quebracho from Argentina, right? The Quebracho from Argentina is not considered an Islamist group by any stretch of the imagination. It's more of a agitprop group that was working to, basically drive a narrative against capitalism and U.S. hegemony and things like that. Well, what would we find out when we knocked into Nisman's wiretaps? What did we find out? They were funded, they were supported, and they were linked to Iran through a gentleman that's now in jail, Fernando Esteche. The etnocaceristas from Peru, the cocaleros from Bolivia, the colectivos from Venezuela. These aren't commonly or prominently known as members of the global jihad or the Islamist terrorist movement, but they are linked. And that goes to what Selena was saying. There is a convergence, and that convergence goes beyond just organized crime and terrorism. That convergence goes into agitprop groups. That convergence goes into nation states. There is a convergence happening because, as they say in the military, amateurs talk strategy, but professionals talk logistics. At the end of the day, the logistical networks that is what brings all these countries, all these actors together. And I think that is what Latin America needs to address, because as they were told us in the past, Elon, we're a logistic hub, right? We're not the target. Well, if you're a logistic hub, then you're not just a logistic hub for Islamist terrorism. You're a logistic for all these negative actors, and there's certain nation states that are helping it. So I think that that's one thing, and one more last point, and I promise I'll shut up. There is a fear, I think, among the folks that know, the credible in the counterterrorism community in Latin America, there is a fear, and I understand it. We were attacked by Hezbollah. I'm a U.S. Marine, and the Marines were one of the first attacks by Hezbollah in 1983. So we get it. As someone said in the ministerial, in Spanish is no llamemos al diablo, right? Let's not call the devil. Well, the devil's already here. So we have to deal with it. Hezbollah is not Al-Qaeda, is not Daesh. It's not going to randomly select targets and just go after terrorist attacks just because they want to create a media narrative. Hezbollah is strategic, they're calculated, they're patient, and they work with Iran. So the attack in AMIA, they had nothing against Argentina. There was no reason for Hezbollah to attack Argentina. The only reason they attacked Argentina was because Iran told it to do so. And that's all it needs. If Iran wakes up tomorrow and says, I want to attack any country in the Western Hemisphere, Hezbollah will act. And they are prepared and ready to act. We have to be ready to counter that. The point of anti-terrorism is to anticipate these terror actions and neutralize them. It's insufficient to wait for a bomb to go off and say, oh, wow, I told you there was a problem over there. And the only way to do that is to criminalize the action of being a terrorist. If you put a shirt on and it says Hezbollah, you should be prosecuted, at least investigated. And that wasn't the case in Latin America. I think Alon knows there was a store of Al-Qaeda or an internet cafe of Al-Qaeda in Sao Paulo at the time. So I wanted to kind of encapsulate the challenge in Latin America that maybe folks that haven't worked on this issue maybe don't understand. It's not as easy as it sounds, and I fully understand all the connotations of the term and the variances of the interpretations, but it is a serious challenge that I think that we have to assume collectively.
Thank you, Joseph. So we have 8 minutes left, and I'm gonna I received one card from someone in the audience, and it's a very good question. Whoever posed it, I was actually going to pose the same question. It has taken us so long to get to this point. That's what I was trying to say in my opening remarks. Is that we're sitting here and we should be elated that we've come this far. But it's been so frustrating in each of our fields, whether it's educating the public and the media through what I do, and in each of your own fields of expertise, whether it's at the political level, the financial level. It has been really an uphill challenge, despite all of the excellent intelligence and information that's been out there pointing fingers at Hezbollah and Iran all this time. The fact that we've come here and we're sitting here today doesn't mean that when the event's over today, our job is done. We actually have so much more work ahead of us to continue this uphill struggle. The question that was posed is, how do we prevent this lag going forward, as it only allows our adversaries to strengthen while this lag continues? And we've seen that all along. In the decade, more than a decade now, that all of us have been talking about this issue, Iran and Hezbollah have only continued to strengthen their activities in Latin America and elsewhere, and even here in the United States. So if you had one or two messages for the audience and for the cameras, in each of your respective fields, what do you think is the point moving forward that we can't allow to happen anymore based on our past experiences so that we can push this agenda forward and faster?
Okay, I'll start. Let me try, I'm a little bit of an absent-minded professor, so let me try to sort of narrow this down as neatly as possible. I think there's really three big takeaways here. The first of them is political. Joseph, I think, is absolutely right when he talks about the tendency, the regional political tendency to sit on the sidelines, to not call the devil, to sort of not make provocative actions, right? If you look along the length and breadth of Latin America, what you essentially have is you have three groups. We have groups who are facilitators or enablers, right, for ideological reasons or for infrastructural reasons. You have groups who are observers, right, who don't want to make any sudden moves so that they don't become more attractive as targets or more attractive as points of exploitation. And you have what we used to talk about when we talked about China, we don't so much anymore, responsible stakeholders or increasingly responsible stakeholders. Countries that are willing to take not only a local, but maybe even a regional role in policing good governance, good corporate practices, and creating a less permissive environment. Our goal, politically, has to be to expand that last group by eating into the middle group and reducing the freedom of action of the first group. And I think that's a hugely important thing that has started now as a result of the Argentine designation, but it certainly doesn't end there. And so that should be our political goal. The second task is administrative. Latin America does not have anything resembling a coherent framework for counterterrorism in the same way that we would think about it in North America. Joseph and I co-edited a book in 2016 called Iran's Strategic Penetration of Latin America, which talked about a lot of these issues. But in the chapter that I wrote, as part of that chapter, I had one of my researchers look at which countries in Latin America and the Caribbean actually had on the books at the time counterterrorism frameworks of the same kind that has existed in the United States since the late 1990s. The answer was, of the 33 countries of Latin America and the Caribbean, less than half. And that's only slightly better now. And so for threat actors, for violent organizations that are looking at permissive environments, Latin America is still very attractive, and we have to reduce that. And the third is we have to be cognizant not just in terms of our weaknesses in the region, but also in terms of potential political changes that could bring dangers to our doorstep. And here, the question that Leah asked me about Iran is, I think, very germane. What we've discovered in other fields, in adjacent fields, fields like cyber warfare, for example, is that Iran is a dynamic actor, that Iran's interests change as a result of the fact that it has an enormously volatile political relationship with the United States and increasingly with the international community. That may make the activities of both Iran itself and its proxies different and challenging in new ways as we move forward. And so it's not enough just to look at the terror threat in Latin America as it exists today. We should also be thinking creatively about how it may evolve in the next several years and how we get ahead of that curve as well.
So I think we're living a very interesting time with an actually alignment in terms of political will to go after Hezbollah as well as other groups which were actually included in the communique last Friday. What I would like to try to take a look is how do we train and change that political will and translate that to actual actions. And I think there are several things that we need to, A, be able to train, and more importantly, keep abreast all of our experts who are in the intel and in law enforcement and the judicial components, not just in the United States, but our counterparts downrange, because we know who these people are. It's a matter of putting together credible cases, and more importantly, sharing intelligence and sharing information, not just within our countries, but across borders, because these are trans-regional actors. And more importantly, we have now, over the last 10 years, deliberately included financial intelligence in all of our law enforcement and criminal investigations. That should not, we should actually double down on that, because the money tells a tale, as opposed to, I would do a lot of work in Mexico where some of our informants disappear or change their tune, but the money and the communications are critical components of any of these cases. How do you bring them to justice? We have to bring these people to justice. Also, because by bringing them to justice, it creates a deterrence for others who will think about being these aiders and abettors. We've always gone against the terrorists, what we call the command and control. What we have to take a look at are these broader structures of supporters who provide safe haven, who promote propaganda, as well as the financiers, and then more importantly, take advantage of a real interesting political time in Latin America now, where many of the countries now share the same goals of promoting security and prosperity in the hemisphere, and particularly are much more aware of what we call external actors, and those external actors include China, Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, and more importantly, change and transform that political will into concrete actions, and now is the time to actually do it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that Elon and Selena has said. That's not very unusual, actually, but we tend to agree quite a bit. We work together on these issues. The only thing I'll emphasize or re-emphasize, something I said earlier, is the public education part of this. There's something one of my favorite economists once said, Milton Friedman, that he said that politicians are like corks in the ocean, right? And the job of civil society is to move the tide. So whichever way the tide goes is kind of, in some ways, the way the politicians go. So with that tide being public sentiment and public opinion. And I think that that's where we're going to probably find our biggest roadblock. We may have political actors that have the political will. We may have training and technical aspects that are happening, which are happening as the Department of Justice mentioned today, Treasury, State, all this. But if the public doesn't get this, if the public in Latin America if this is just too foreign for them, this won't, it may happen, things like in Argentina, but they won't be sustainable. Meaning that a change of government could take place and they could easily remove it if it's an executive decree that doesn't even require to go through the Congress. So I think a public education is going to be a big part of that. How we do that is it has to be a little more creative. I don't think, and I've worked in Latin America a very long time, I don't think running down to the region and saying, look, Hezbollah is everywhere and Iran's going to attack, and just an alarmist message won't work. I think we have to be creative in how we explain to them that I think the convergence argument is a strong argument, because it's a technical argument, it's an academic argument. National Defense University has already published 2 books on this with some of the best experts in the U.S., but and some in Latin America. So I think that's a big part of it, using strong arguments that Latin Americans can understand and relate to, and then making them popularized, so that the politicians can absorb these things and translate them in ways that their constituents are concerned about. Organized crime is one of those. I think every government in Latin America has organized crime as one of their top national security concerns. Well, we have news for them. Hezbollah is a major organized crime group. I mean, they are, in some cases, I would say, they operate more as an organized crime than they do as a terrorist group. But just because, if someone comes and robs my house and then kills my brother, that doesn't just mean he robbed my house. That doesn't just mean he's a robber. That means he's also a murderer. So we can't distinguish all those actions. I mean, Hezbollah obviously is an organized crime group. They engage in massive amounts of money laundering, drug trafficking, primarily cocaine trafficking, but they also kill people. And we can never forget that fact. And I think that's the public education side is a big part of it for me. And that's actually, I should say, that's pretty much Leah, your big involvement in, Leah's works she leads this group called Fuente Latina. And so aside from my trips with Elon to Latin America, I've taken a lot of trips with Leah, more on the public side where she would arrange interviews with a range of media outlets in Spanish mostly in these countries. And my job is just to sit in front of a camera and speak until I can't speak anymore. But that's, I mean, those kind of things, and not just me. I mean, there's plenty of people that we could draw upon, expertise in Europe, in Israel, and here in the United States and in other parts of the region. So thank you for your work as well.
So time has run out, but I will end with what you said, Joseph, is that a lot of the voices over the last decade that have been speaking up about this important issue have been coming from outside of Latin America. And I think it's more important moving forward that we have more organic voices from within the region that are able to speak to each and every one of their target audiences in a vocal and public way to continue educating a broader audience about the threat of Hezbollah and other terrorist and extremist actors in the region. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, panelists. And because this is a media/policy finance panel, we are taking a selfie.
Okay.
We gonna fit?
Do I have long enough arms?
I was gonna say. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, this panel particularly, I think, is going to be the most informative panel because we have policymakers, individuals that have been involved on this effort from the beginning, from the policy front. When all the discussions that we've had up until now have been about how can we change policy, how can we get policy aligned with the threats, to give the law enforcement, intelligence, and military individuals the capabilities and the tools that they need to go after these networks. Well, these are three individuals that have been involved in this. I'm going to introduce the panel, and I should say that our first panelist, Congressman Jeff Duncan, will only be able to stay for his remarks. He has to go back to attend to congressional affairs, so we're going to have him go first. But I want to introduce the whole panel, and then I will turn it over to my colleague, Hugo Acha, who will work with Congressman Luis Petri, who will give his presentation in Spanish, but we will do interpretation. First, let me introduce Congressman Jeff Duncan. Congressman Jeff Duncan, I'll read you his formal bio, but let me just say on a personal level, has been working on this since I can remember, when I was involved in doing this effort back in 2012 and 2013. Congressman Duncan, at the time, sat on the Homeland Security Committee. As I mentioned before, he chaired a subcommittee hearing that dealt with Iran-Hezbollah networks in the Western Hemisphere, invited Prosecutor Alberto Nisman to testify in that hearing. Unfortunately, Nisman was not allowed to come and testify, but we had a productive hearing nonetheless. He carried that work over to the House Foreign Affairs Committee, where he chaired the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee, held subsequent hearings, and actually passed the first piece of legislation, or introduced the first piece of legislation that passed on countering Iran and Hezbollah in the Western Hemisphere. That was signed under the last government, and now has taken this effort onto other committees in Congress, and is also I believe, the new chair or co-chair of the House Argentine Caucus, which is a congressional parliamentary friendship group between the Argentine Congress and the United States that was established, I believe, in 2018, January 2018. And the previous chairs were Congressman Elliot Engel and Congressman Mike McCall. So no stranger to the region, no stranger to Argentina, no stranger to the AMIA and the work that's been done. It's a pleasure that you join us today, Congressman Duncan. We consider you one of the leaders on this effort in the U.S. Congress, and I'm very delighted that you're going to be chairing this new friendship group, and you can count on our support, and we're very much looking forward to your remarks. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Jeff Duncan.
Thank you, and I apologize that I will have to leave after my remarks, but I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here, because this is an issue I've started following in 2011, and that is security issues in the region, in the Western Hemisphere, Iran's activity, Hezbollah, the tri-border region, the AMIA bombing, understanding that the largest loss of life from an act of terrorism prior to 9/11 happened in Argentina, Buenos Aires, with the AMIA bombing. And we need to remind folks about that. And we're now at an anniversary of the AMIA bombing, so it's very apropos to talk about where that act of terror was hatched, and that was a tri-border region, and it was propagated by Hezbollah, and Hezbollah is supported by Iran. Iran's the largest state sponsor of terrorism. Iran is very active with cultural centers in the Western Hemisphere. That is ways they can not only recruit and train folks, but they can spread their propaganda about the West throughout the region, and that is not really conducive for the relationships the United States of America has with the countries in the Western Hemisphere. I've spent a lot of time traveling and learning. I'm a sort of an exploratory congressman. I'm very hands-on. I like to go and see. I was in the Bakken in North Dakota just this week looking at horizontal drilling, hydraulic fracturing, and energy issues, but I've spent time in Paraguay and Ciudad del Este and Buenos Aires and other places in the region talking with folks that are affected, talking with government leaders. And one thing I want to do is applaud President Macri and his effort when he was elected to reopen the investigation and what happened with Alberto Nisman. Alberto Nisman was actually the single most, I think, important person in Argentina investigating the AMIA bombing and really looking at potential government involvement and cover-up of the genesis of the AMIA bombing. And unfortunately, he was assassinated. and the last government tried to sweep his assassination under the rug. President Macri said, no, we're going to open that investigation, find out how Alberto Nisman died, and also continue the work that he had started in looking into an act of terror there in the capital city of Argentina. So as co-chair of the Argentina caucus, we're going to look at shared cooperation, economic opportunities, and ways our governments can work together. But I promise you, I will continue looking at what's going on in the region to try to help Argentina prevent another act of terror on its soil, whether it targets Israeli or Jewish interests there, or whether those targets may be Argentine or U.S. interests. So it's important to do that. It's important also for me and other congressmen to travel to Ciudad del Este and understand the tri-border region. Understand that folks from Lebanon, way back in the late 70s, began traveling to that region, and Hezbollah got a foothold there. And when you ride around that region, you see that a lot of the economic activity that's going on, Hezbollah is skimming money to fund their terrorist efforts around the globe. And that is just one center that we know that folks have traveled to, exchange their documents in order to get false papers, false passports, in order to transit the rest of this hemisphere and try to get to the United States of America. And we know that we have a porous southern border here, and that folks, if they can transit to Mexico on Fox documentation, they can enter the United States if they're willing to cross miles of desert like we see happening every day. That's a concern. If you ever ask me of what keeps you up at night, then it's our porous southern border and the fact that terrorists could come across our border and that we have no idea who is in the United States of America. Let me repeat that. We have no idea who's in the United States of America. We know that Iran Quds Force, the Iran Revolutionary Guard Quds Force, tried to enter the United States of America along our southern border in order to assassinate the ambassador from Saudi Arabia in this very city. And that was thwarted because of a DEA effort. We got lucky, folks. You don't always get lucky. So if we know that the Iran Quds Force has tried to enter the United States to assassinate the Saudi Arabian ambassador, what else have they entered the United States to do? It's very important that we continue to work together as security elements within the region. And that's not just Argentina, but that is Colombia, that is Brazil, that is Paraguay, that is Uruguay, that is Chile, that is Peru, to make sure that our intelligence services are talking to one another, that we're aware of the potential Iranian activity here, we're aware of the potential Hezbollah activity here, and we can thwart any sort of effort that Iran or other elements may have, whether that's ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, Abu Sayyaf, any of the other terrorist organizations that want to do great harm to the Jewish community, to Israel, to the United States, or to Western interest or Western Hemisphere interest. That's important. It's important that we work together. And it's also important that policymakers like I travel to that area. When I traveled to Ciudad del Este back, it's been several years ago now, I talked about earlier about the financial transactions, whether it's rent, whether it's the sale of knockoff goods. Hezbollah is being funded there. We've got to figure out a way to stop that money flow. We also have to try to stop the false documentation, because I could go through a litany of examples, but we know that people on false documents have been apprehended in Brazil, they've been apprehended in Honduras. There's one instance where 5 Syrians traveled to the tri-border region, exchanged their documents. They actually traveled from Syria on fake Israeli passports. They exchanged those passports for Greek passports in the tri-border region and worked their way on up, and were in an airport in Honduras trying to fly to the United States of America. Now, they said they were teachers and farmers. I find that hard to believe that you would pay the money and to go to that length to exchange false documents to try to get to the United States of America. These are areas where I think the cooperation between Paraguay and between Argentina, between Brazil, between the United States is imperative, that we're able to thwart that sort of thing. I look forward to continuing my work as the co-chair. I'm limited because it's a bipartisan caucus. It is not just security focused. I was more effective as chairman of the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee. I was more effective as a member of the Homeland Security Committee. I'm now on Energy and Commerce. So it's very difficult for me to focus on these issues from the Energy and Commerce Committee because we just don't deal with those sort of things. So finding opportunities like this to speak to you, finding opportunities to work as co-chair of the Argentine American Caucus is very vital to members like myself that aren't on the appropriate committees to continue our work. And I will say that I'm very close to Carlos and Mark, and Mark Walker's here. I don't see, oh, there he is. And very close to them. Rebecca, that used to work with me, now works at the Department of State, Assistant Undersecretary of Western Hemisphere Affairs. So I still have my fingers on the pulse of what's going on in the region through my relationships. And if something crops up that I should know about, I have no doubt that my friends and allies and colleagues will share that with me. But they also need to hear from you because you might be tuned into different channels that the committee needs to know about, or other advocacy groups, think tanks, policy groups need to know about. And that's important that we maintain the relationships that are in this room in order to further the information flow to policymakers, decision makers like myself and others that can make a difference in a timely manner. And so I thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak. I just want to reiterate that my work in Argentina, my work on security issues in this region, my furtherance on understanding that Russia is a big player in Venezuela, Iran's a big player with cultural centers. They are not friends of ours in this region. There is a reason that they're here, and we need to be aware of that at every moment so that we can react and work with our colleagues within the OAS. We need to challenge the OAS to step up its game and support democracy. That's what it was founded to do, support democracy in this region and be a little stronger against Venezuela and support for democracy there. Because a free market, democracy, democratic institution in Venezuela helps thwart Russia and Iran and China and other elements that we may not think are friendly in this region. So I think that's important. I think that's something that we aren't talking about enough that we should talk about. We see continual efforts in whether it's Bolivia and Ecuador as well they're not friendly to American interests. If they're not friendly to American interests, I doubt they're friendly to other democratic interests in the region as well. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. I look forward to continuing our work as co-chair. If there's opportunities to speak in other forums, please let me know. I apologize I've got to leave, but thank you for being here and thanks for listening, and God bless you. Thanks so much.
This next presentation is a very special presentation, and actually it's so special it's going to be done for two people. Congressman Luis Petri is perhaps the most important political figure when it comes to talking about what took place in Argentina last week. And I refer to the designation of Hezbollah, the historic designation of Hezbollah as a terrorist group. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, Congressman Petri was the only congressman in the National Congress of Argentina that was entrusted upon to work with President Macri and his national security team, particularly his ministers in security, justice, intelligence, and foreign ministry as well, of course, to be able to find the path forward. Because aside from the technical aspects of the registry, there was also political aspects that needed to be overcome, that needed to be well-defined, and that needed to be thought through so that this could become a very solid effort and permanent effort to be able to change the trajectory of Argentina's counterterrorism efforts. Congressman Petri led this path forward and worked directly with the ministries and was at the ministerial last week where Secretary Pompeo spoke. His formal bio is that he's a national congressman for the Unión Cívica Radical, the political party in Argentina. He's the second vice president in the Chamber of Deputies of the Argentine National Congress, that's equivalent to our House of Representatives. Congressman Petri has been a provincial legislator for 2 terms. He started his second term as a national deputy in 2017. He is currently on the National Defense and the Homeland Security Committee in Argentina, among many others, in the Congress, and he's worked on several counterterrorism legislative initiatives, including the designation of Hezbollah as a terrorist group. He's a lawyer by trade who received his degree from Universidad Nacional del Litoral in Argentina, and we are very honored to have his presence here with us at the U.S. Senate to be able to talk to us about exactly what took place in Argentina for the first time in a public setting here in the United States. Let me also introduce our research fellow for countering transnational organized crime, Hugo Acha. Hugo Acha is a close colleague, an expert on everything that has to do with the flow of illicit narcotics, money laundering, and the convergence with terrorist organizations. He has been working on these issues for more than a decade. He's originally from Bolivia, so he started examining this when he was a human rights attorney in Bolivia. Obviously, that's become increasingly difficult to do from within Bolivia. Had to leave the country and seek asylum here in the United States. Is now, I'm proud to say, a U.S. citizen as of this year, and has been involved in a lot of our research at looking at how these networks converge, not just in Bolivia, but all throughout South America, Latin America, and moving into Africa and Europe, because this truly is a global challenge. So Hugo will help me in this portion of the presentation, because Congressman Petrie was much more comfortable presenting in Spanish. His PowerPoint is going to be in English, for those that want to read along, but Hugo will help us in translating his presentation as we go along, and then Hugo will give you remarks afterwards to sum up the major points of what Congressman Petrie is saying, and then add his own reflection towards the end, and then we'll turn to Congressman Petrie. So without further ado, please help me in welcoming Congressman Petrie and Hugo Acha.
First of all, I apologize, but my English is not good and I prefer to speak to Spanish for you. En primer lugar, quiero agradecer a Joseph y a su centro por esta invitación. También quiero agradecer especialmente la presencia de embajadores y representantes consulares de distintos países y particularmente de la embajada y del embajador de la República Argentina. Agradecer el apoyo de Robert, que ya ha estado varias veces en la República Argentina, acompañando y estimulando a que luchemos contra el terrorismo que azota al mundo.
Well, first and foremost, I want to thank Joseph for this opportunity. I want also thank the Argentinian ambassador for his presence here, also members of the diplomatic corps here in Washington, D.C., and also thank Robert for all his support in this endeavor.
Hay un antes y un después del 2001 en el mundo, con los atentados a las Torres Gemelas. Sin embargo, ese cambio se produjo quizás antes en mi país, en 1992, cuando se perpetraba un atentado a la Embajada de Israel. 2 años después, la República Argentina sufría el peor atentado que recuerde su historia, que le costara la vida a 85 personas y más de 300 heridos.
For the world, there is a before and an after when you consider the attack on the World Trade Center. But for me, as an Argentinian, this story began a lot earlier. In 1992, the bombing of the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires was the first taste of global terror. That was followed 2 years later by the worst attack in Argentinian history and only second to the aforementioned attack to the World Trade Center. That was the bombing of AMIA in Buenos Aires that caused 85 casualties and more than 300 wounded.
Hace 25 años, cada 18 de julio, las víctimas y todos los ciudadanos de la República Argentina nos reunimos para reclamar justicia, para que se conozca la verdad y para que sean condenados los perpetradores de este horrible atentado.
For 25 years, every July, on the 18th, we, Argentinians, gather to ask justice. Justice for the victims, justice for everybody affected by this heinous act.
La semana pasada, el presidente Macri anunció la creación de un registro de entidades y personas vinculadas al terrorismo y su financiamiento, que marca a las claras una decidida lucha contra el terrorismo internacional que no comenzó la semana pasada, sino que comenzó desde que arrancó su gestión como presidente de la República Argentina y que marca un antes y un después en la lucha contra el terrorismo en la región.
Last week, President Mauricio Macri published a decree, namely the Public Registry of People or Entities Linked to Acts of Terrorism and Their Financing. This proves the commitment of President Macri in the fight against global terrorism, a commitment that has not begun just last week, a commitment that is long-lasting to fight international terrorism.
Durante muchos años la República Argentina no tuvo una clara política en lo que tiene que ver con la lucha contra el terrorismo internacional. De hecho, en el año 2013, en un hecho que nos avergüenza, la República Argentina firmó un memorándum con Irán en el cual se creaba una comisión denominada de la verdad que se iba a encargar del juzgamiento de los responsables del atentado. La expresidenta de la Nación, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, consideró este pacto con Irán un hecho histórico y nosotros, en ese momento, desde la oposición, lo calificamos como un pacto de impunidad porque no se puede buscar justicia pactando con los perpetradores, pactando con los responsables del atentado a la embajada de la AMIA.
Sadly, before this, Argentina lacked a clear policy regarding terrorism. An event in 2013 brought shame to all of us as Argentinians. A memorandum was signed between the Argentinian Republic and Iran. It was named, and there's no irony in this, as the Truth Commission. This agreement between the administration of Cristina Fernández de Kirchner was defined by the president herself as an historical opportunity to seek truth and justice for the victims. This is something we must put behind.
Ese memorándum fue cuestionado por toda la dirigencia política de la oposición en ese momento en la Argentina y fue llevado a la justicia por la DAIA y por la AMIA. Y se logró que se declarara inconstitucional, más allá de que había sido aprobado por el Congreso argentino en una lastimosa sesión un mes después de haber sido firmado con Irán, y en donde nunca Irán ratificó ese memorándum porque lo único que buscaba era la desaparición de las alertas rojas en Interpol, algo que no se consiguió.
This memorandum, this agreement was questioned by the opposition. And even after only a month it's been signed, was declared unconstitutional by the Argentinian justice. We are clear that the only objective, the only target of this agreement was to search impunity for the perpetrators. And their only goal was to withdraw the red alerts that have been put against those responsible for the attack.
Una de las primeras medidas que tomó el presidente Macri cuando asumió su presidencia el 10 de diciembre de 2015 fue ordenar al ministro de Justicia que no apelara la decisión que declaraba la inconstitucionalidad del memorándum con Irán. Pero además de eso, instruyó al ministro de Justicia para que pusiera e hiciera todas las acciones a su cargo para lograr justicia y lograr la condena de los responsables del atentado. Y a partir de allí comenzamos a trabajar en un proyecto de juicio en ausencia.
In 2015, as soon as he took office, President Macri instructed his Minister of Justice to not appeal this sentence that declared the memorandum between Iran and Argentina unconstitutional. And he also instructed members of his cabinet to work as quickly as possible to perform what is defined as a trial in absence against everybody related and responsible for the AMIA attack to obtain their conviction.
Un año antes, el 15 de enero del 2015, el fiscal federal Alberto Nisman hacía una denuncia que conmocionaba la opinión pública en mi país y acusaba a la entonces presidenta de la Nación de traición a la patria y encubrimiento por la firma del memorándum con Irán.
On January 15, 2015, the late prosecutor Alberto Nisman shocked the public opinion of Argentina. He publicly indicted former President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner of betraying Argentina and being an accomplice in the AMIA attacks.
El día anterior al que debía presentarse al Congreso de la Nación, en donde, junto a la por entonces presidenta de la Comisión de Legislación Penal, íbamos a recibir a la denuncia de Alberto Nisman, apareció asesinado en su departamento, con una clara vinculación con la denuncia que había realizado.
The day before, Prosecutor Nisman had to be present in Congress to testify on the results of his investigation, and we were eagerly waiting for the conclusions of this report. Alberto Nisman was found murdered in his own apartment.
Hoy, el asesinato de Alberto Nisman continúa impune y se suma a las víctimas del atentado a la AMIA.
Today, Alberto Nisman's assassination is still in impunity, and we consider him another victim of the AMIA attack.
El gobierno del presidente Macri está decididamente comprometido en la lucha contra el terrorismo internacional y el financiamiento de sus actividades, y desde un comienzo tomó medidas en este sentido, no solo con la no apelación del memorándum con Irán, tampoco con la creación del registro, sino que ha tomado muchas medidas que quizás pasaron en su momento desapercibidas, pero que hoy toman verdadera dimensión y perfilan y dan testimonio de la convicción que tiene a la hora de encarar la lucha contra el terrorismo internacional.
President Macri's commitment in the fight against global terrorism is not only limited to the aforementioned not appealing instruction on the declaration of inconstitutionality of the memorandum between Argentina and Iran. It's not only limited to this registry. It comprises a number of actions that are less known but not less effective. This commitment is ongoing and it's part of President Macri's policy.
Antes de hablar de lo que supone y significa el registro de entidades y personas vinculadas al terrorismo, simplemente quiero enunciar las medidas porque me parece que son relevantes. La primera tiene que ver con la posibilidad de que se permita la figura del arrepentido en causas de terrorismo en la República Argentina. Además, que se establezcan la posibilidad de disponer de técnicas especiales de investigación en causas de terrorismo, como puede ser el agente encubierto, el agente revelador o el informante, para garantizar que, en definitiva, se pueda llegar a esclarecer los hechos delictivos a partir de valiosa información que se pueda aportar.
In order to get a better understanding, before explaining the registry, I would like to mention some of these measures that have been undertaken by the Macri administration. Among them, we have created new legal figures as the effective cooperation in cases of terrorism, the use of covert agents, the use of informants that were not previously covered in Argentinian law.
La aplicación contra organizaciones terroristas y terroristas de la extinción de dominio o el decomiso sin condena para sacarles los bienes producto de las actividades ilícitas y para que el Estado no se transforme en garante de los bienes de las organizaciones terroristas es otra de las medidas impulsadas, además de un incremento de los controles migratorios, fundamentalmente para impedir que ingresen personas con frondosos prontuarios eventualmente vinculadas con el terrorismo, algo que no estaba garantizado. Esto es, con anterioridad a la administración del presidente Macri, no habían controles fronterizos y por lo tanto ingresaban al país personas con pedidos de captura internacional o eventualmente vinculadas a delitos graves como por ejemplo el terrorismo.
Other measures include the possibility of seizing property from individuals or organizations linked with terrorist activities, more strict immigration control, which allows now the Argentinian Republic to see what kind of individuals are entering the country. If they have a criminal record, before this type of control was not possible due to the lack of a legal framework.
Y a partir de un gran trabajo de la Unidad de Información Financiera que conduce Mariano Federici, se logró el congelamiento de activos del clan Baracat en la zona de la Triple Frontera, y otra de las medidas que estamos impulsando desde el Congreso de la Nación y creemos que es imprescindible aprobar es el juicio en ausencia para que se pueda condenar a los responsables aunque evadan el accionar de la justicia, aunque no quieran someterse a la justicia argentina y no se presenten en los tribunales de mi país.
Another example of these new measures is the freezing of all the assets belonging to the Hassan Barakat clan. We also are pushing forward for the approval of legal measures to allow the trial in absence for people responsible of terrorism activities.
Yendo puntualmente al registro de organizaciones y entidades terroristas, necesitábamos quebrar muchísimos años de historia de impunidad en la República Argentina, en donde a los terroristas no se los llamaba por su nombre. Muy por el contrario, como supo decir en algún momento el embajador de Israel en la Argentina, cualquiera podía contribuir con Hezbollah en la República Argentina o cualquiera podía izar una bandera de Hezbollah en la República Argentina porque no era considerada una organización terrorista. Esto cambió a partir de la semana pasada en mi país.
Now entering into the subject of the public registry of people or entities linked to acts of terrorism and their financing, this is a historical landmark. Terrorists were not even called by their name in Argentina. If somebody liked to fly the flag of Hezbollah in Argentina, as it was mentioned by the Israeli ambassador, they were free to do so. Nowadays, that's not the case due to the legal actions taken by the Argentinian government.
Las únicas organizaciones y personas que eran consideradas terroristas en la República Argentina eran aquellas que listaba el Consejo de Seguridad de Naciones Unidas, pero no reconocía otras organizaciones o entidades o personas terroristas vinculadas a listas de otros países o eventualmente de las propias causas judiciales que la República Argentina iniciaba en el país.
So basically, the only people that could be considered terrorists in Argentina were those defined by the UN Security Council. Not even people accused of such activities in Argentina could be called terrorists.
Lo primero que empezamos a hacer es trabajar sobre un anteproyecto de mi autoría, que posteriormente se transformó en la base del decreto, y lo que hicimos fue, en primer lugar, derribar los fantasmas del pasado, porque esto no tenía que ver con el terrorismo de Estado de los 70, ni tampoco tenía que ver con la criminalización de la protesta, como algunas organizaciones de izquierda muchas veces creían que este tipo de medidas estaban orientadas.
The first thing we did was to create a project in which I was one of the authors. It was a difficult task because we have to deal with the ghost of the past, the ghost of the past of state terrorism, state-sponsored terrorism during the 70s, and also the fact that we were not criminalizing social protest as it was also done in the past in Argentina.
Queríamos atacar a las organizaciones terroristas de carácter internacional que operaban en la República Argentina. Y por ello conformamos un gran equipo de trabajo que lo integraron en primer lugar y tuvo un papel preponderante Mariano Federici y su unidad de información financiera, que trabajó codo a codo hasta último momento para la concreción de este registro y es quien la semana pasada congeló los activos de Hezbollah y le incorporó al registro.
We wanted to attack terrorist organizations that were active in the national and international arena. For this task, we created a team, a task force. One of the most relevant participants in this task force was Mariano Federici, who was leading the financial unit and who was paramount in obtaining the freezing of Hezbollah assets in Argentina.
Pero también trabajaron codo a codo e hicieron grandes aportes y aportaron sus equipos técnicos el embajador de mi país, Jorge Forí, el canciller. Lo hizo también la ministra de Seguridad, Patricia Bullrich, el ministro de Justicia, Germán Garabano, el ministro de Defensa, Oscar Aguad, y el asesor en política exterior, Fulvio Pompeo. Pusieron todos sus equipos a trabajar en este proyecto que no tenía precedentes históricos en el país y, como dijo recién Joseph, tampoco en la región.
Other people who worked in this project were Jorge Fori, Patricia Bullrich, Germán Garavano, a gentleman by the name of Oscar Aguad, and Jorge Pompeo.
¿Quiénes van a integrar o quiénes están ya integrando porque este registro ya está en vigencia en la República Argentina? Claro está que lo integran todas aquellas personas u organizaciones que lista el Consejo de Seguridad de Naciones Unidas.
This registry is already being enacted. It, of course, includes every single person defined as a terrorist by the United Nations Security Council.
También lo integran todas aquellas personas u organizaciones que estén siendo investigadas en la República Argentina por causas vinculadas al terrorismo o su financiamiento, sin importar que tengan condena. La sola investigación ya habilita la inscripción en el registro de personas o entidades terroristas.
But also every single person and organization that is being already investigated for terrorism-related activities in Argentina. Even the sole beginning of the investigation, it's cause enough for this person and organization to be included in the registry.
Y también aquellas personas y organizaciones que la Unidad de Información Financiera congele los activos, con lo cual esto abre la posibilidad de que puedan ser inscriptas en el registro de personas y organizaciones terroristas que sean solicitadas por terceros estados y que la Unidad de Información Financiera juzgue como razonable y a partir de allí congele los activos y posteriormente los inscriba en el registro.
Also, those persons and organizations that are defined as participants in funding terrorism. This allows the registry to be activated, freezing assets, and also allowing Argentina to effectively cooperate with other countries when a request for these individuals come through the legal channels.
Este registro ya entró en vigencia desde el día siguiente al de su publicación y actualmente cuenta con más de 1.000 personas y organizaciones terroristas listadas, entre ellas Hezbollah, que al día siguiente de su publicación se le congelaron los activos producto del pedido de la Unidad de Información Financiera.
This registry was enacted the very next day after it was decreed. It includes, to this day, 1,000 people, over 1,000 people and organizations connected to terrorist activities. It also includes Hezbollah, which the very next day had all its assets in Argentina frozen by the Financial Investigative Unit of the Argentinian government.
Esta medida no hubiese sido posible, y esto es necesario destacarlo y reafirmarlo, sin la decisión inquebrantable del presidente de mi país, Mauricio Macri, quien no dudó un segundo a la hora de apoyarnos e incentivarnos para que buscáramos todos los medios y mecanismos posibles para declarar a las organizaciones terroristas que operaban en el país, que operaron en el país y que cometieron los atentados de la Embajada de Israel y de la AMIA.
This measure wouldn't have been possible without the action of President Mauricio Macri, who didn't hesitate in supporting us in order to obtain the proper legal measures to fight against terrorism and to seek justice for the victims of the AMIA attack.
Como dice el presidente de mi país, la paz mundial se construye día a día, ladrillo por ladrillo, y la República Argentina, la semana pasada, asentó un ladrillo muy importante para declarar a las organizaciones terroristas en este registro.
As President Macri says, world peace is built daily, brick by brick, and by this measure, we have put another brick in order to be able to construct a better and more safe environment in the international community.
Después de los atentados, ya nada será igual. Nosotros no seremos iguales. Tenemos la obligación de ser mejores para garantizar la paz de las generaciones futuras, para que no vivan el horror, la violencia y la sangre que le tocó vivir a nuestra generación.
After the attacks, we were not the same. After terrorism, nobody can be the same. Through these legal measures, we want the future generations to be spared of the horrors, the bloodshed, and the violence that we suffered in our time.
Tenemos la obligación de responder al odio con las armas de la democracia, con el brazo de la justicia, respetando los derechos humanos, pero todos los derechos humanos, también los derechos humanos de las víctimas, que reclaman justicia y condenar a los responsables.
We have the obligation to respond to hatred with the weapons of democracy, respecting human rights, but also remembering that we must respect the human rights of the victims, not only of the perpetrators.
Los derechos humanos no pueden transformarse en una garantía de impunidad para los culpables, abandonando a su suerte a las víctimas.
Human rights cannot be a blank check of impunity. We need to remember that first and foremost, human rights are there to support and protect the victims.
Necesitamos pelear todos juntos. La cooperación es fundamental para vencer al terrorismo. No podemos estar separados o aislados frente a este flagelo común. No podemos permitir que el terrorismo avance en el mundo. Por eso tenemos que poder pensar y crear organizaciones supranacionales que tengan capacidad de investigar y perseguir a terroristas por el mundo. Debemos reconocer que no alcanzan con los sistemas de justicia locales.
We need cooperation. We need to realize that we need to work together, all of us. We need to acknowledge the necessity, the need to create supranational organizations able to fight terrorism wherever it's found.
Argentina considera a los Estados Unidos un aliado estratégico en la lucha contra el terrorismo, la narcocriminalidad y el crimen organizado y agradece todo su apoyo, fundamentalmente a partir del último pedido de recompensa a uno de los responsables del atentado.
Argentina recognizes the United States as an ally in the fight against terrorism and transnational organized crime, especially in the cooperation that was demonstrated in the latest days in the effective arrest and detention of one of the persons responsible of the attack.
Por último, mi compromiso y el compromiso de mi gobierno es para con las víctimas. No vamos a pactar con los perpetradores. No vamos a firmar el perdón de los responsables. Queremos su condena. Queremos que paguen en prisión sus delitos. No pueden permanecer impunes. La memoria de 85 personas así lo exigen.
Last but not least, we must establish one more time that our responsibility is to the victims. We will not cast any pact with the perpetrators. We want their convictions. We want them to be legally convicted, respecting their human rights, but effectively establishing justice.
25 años de impunidad nos avergüenzan, pero también nos obligan a ser duros para condenar a quienes han sido sus responsables. Argentina tiene una herida abierta hace más de 25 años Las víctimas necesitan justicia, el pueblo necesita saber qué pasó y las instituciones necesitan estar a la altura para dar las respuestas que demandan las víctimas y la sociedad.
25 years of impunity have ashamed us. This attack is an open wound in the fabric of Argentinian society. Justice for the victims is our priority.
Platón decía, justicia lenta no es justicia. Yo agrego, no es impunidad porque llega, aunque tarde, cuando ya nadie le espera. Las víctimas de la AMIA aún esperan. Muchas gracias.
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, I want to thank the representative for his words. I think it's very moving to finally see the Argentinian government acting to provide justice for the victims. On the other hand, there's a very, very important concept that has been repeated here. It was established on the first panel, and it's part of the message of the representative as it was of the words of the previous speaker. This is a global threat. The ability of organizations like Hezbollah is not confined to the borders of a single nation. It affects all of us. Who is facilitating the smuggling of gold and the moving of financial resources in Venezuela? Who is actually doing gun-running operations in the Mediterranean and helping ISIS to get weapons? Who is actually facilitating the cash flow of organizations like Odebrecht, one of the most relevant schemes of global corruption in recent history? And the answer to that is Hezbollah. This alone must make all of us realize that we're dealing with a global enemy with multiple allies, part of a completely new form of warfare that integrates the capabilities of organizations like this and those of rogue states that want to attack our values, our principles, and our form of life.
Thank you. Well, very, very important presentation by Congressman Luis Petri. We thank you for coming all the way from Argentina to here to Washington. This is a privilege for us here in the United States to hear exactly how this took place in Argentina. We will be uploading his PowerPoint to our website so everybody can have access to it, that they can want to know the technical aspects of the new registry that is public in Argentina. Also, thank you to Hugo for providing the translation, but also the reflection of what this means in terms of transnational threat networks. Certainly not our final speaker in terms of what we're going to be doing moving forward, but our last speaker for today is a gentleman that really deserves a lot of credit for what's taken place. You know, they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, so we put a picture up on the left from 2016 of a forum that Congressman Pittenger organized in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and by no coincidence, you see Congressman Luis Petri, Congressman Pittenger, myself, and another important congressman, Eduardo Amadeo, who sits on the Finance Committee of the Argentine National Congress, just so that you can get a sense of how long it took and the amount of work it took, led by Argentina, but supported by the United States and others. Congressman Pittenger sat on the House Financial Services Subcommittee on Terror Finance. He also chaired a congressional task force on counterterrorism and unconventional warfare. He, through that task force, started basically a global network called the Parliamentary Intelligence Security Forum, which he has now taken as a 501c3 nonprofit organization that continues to do the work of the forum. This, for example, was a forum that they organized in Buenos Aires along with the Financial Intelligence Unit, the WIF, as is known in Argentina, and its president, Mariano Federici, and has taken this effort to go all around the world. They just held a major conference in France. I was unfortunate I was not able to participate, but a lot of the same colleagues that obviously participated in previous forums were there, and my understanding is going to continue to do forums in around the world and in Latin America, potentially in other places such as Brazil. Maybe hopefully we can convince the congressman to come down with us to Colombia. But it's a very privilege to have you, Congressman Pittenger. I think your efforts of bringing everybody together, talking about these issues, allowed us to get to this point today. And please welcome Congressman Robert Pittenger.
Joseph, my hat's off to you, my friend. You're an extraordinarily gifted leader. You were one of the very first people who briefed me on the issues in South America. Selena as well, if she's still here, she was an extremely capable person. So you helped build the capabilities that we have today. And ladies and gentlemen, I think what you just heard was truly a profile in courage. This young man is extraordinary, and I mean it, truly. All over the world, I look for people with three qualities. One of them, they need to be capable. I've met a lot of capable people, but with that capability, I want somebody who's got convictions. And with that, I want somebody with courage. And my friend, you've got all three. I really appreciate Argentina wouldn't be where it is today without you and people like you. Mariano Federici, of course, your dear friend, is not here. He played a major role. But the voices, the commitment of the Josephs, the Adelinge, there's so many people who have been working and laboring in this area for many, many years. So our effort is, frankly, to bring these smart people together. I'm not one of them, but I know who they are. And to bring them together to these experts in illicit finance and cybersecurity and information sharing, all the issues that are important and relevant in our counterterrorism efforts, to provide a forum for them to build an understanding, a working collaboration with members of parliament throughout the world. So what we've seen now in Argentina is just a tribute to courage and to leadership. And may what you have done there continue. And I think that's where it brings the rest of us in. You know the Latin phrase, carpe diem. Seize the day. We need to seize this moment. There are members of Congress who, if properly understanding these issues, you have friends, whether you're staff here or your organizations that are involved in these issues. We need to go to our colleagues in the House and the Senate. We need to tell them the importance of their engagement today in writing the leadership in Paraguay and Brazil and Colombia, other countries, to take the initiative. These letters have immense effect. We all are affected. I was a member of Congress for 3 terms. When somebody wrote from my district, I wanted to know what they had to say. But when an American congressman flies down to a country or writes a letter, it makes a difference. All the rest of our fora that we're going to have throughout the world, we're planning them when members of Congress are not in session because it's so important for them to be there. But there's some other people who have played a very quiet but a very strategic role, a number of them from the business sector. We have people who are fully aware of the role of illicit tobacco. Folks like Philip Morris, they were one of the first people who briefed me too. But they have been involved in this space for a long time. Certainly, you're aware of what happened in North Carolina this last week with arresting 31 people involved in illicit tobacco. This was initiated in 1998. It was a Hezbollah directed effort. But these groups make a strategic difference. Folks like SAS, a software company who has provided the technology capabilities to track money through the systems, who even today is working through their own analytics to prevent the flow of information and from data coming from the Middle East to the financial intelligence units there in Latin America. So my hat's off to those who have quietly worked to support our governments throughout the world and who have enabled all of us with their tools to be more productive and effective. I would say to you that there's some other issues that keep your eyes on. I was just in the Cologne Free Trade Zone a couple weeks ago. Free flow of goods, uninspected. I mean, they've got sensors, and the trucks are whizzing by the sensors. I said, why aren't they using the sensors? Oh, well, that doesn't matter. We don't need to do that. Well, it does matter. And the head of the Cologne Free Zone grabbed me after this meeting a couple weeks ago and said, I promise you, come back in 6 months, we'll have 6 of them. I said, I'd just like to see you use the one you have now. So this is critical. They're playing games. We need to put pressure on Panama. We need to put pressure on that country. However we do it, American leadership needs to be there to convey to them that they cannot continue with this process. And obviously, the tri-border area is critical in this whole region. We're seeking to have now a forum in Brazil. We've had 2 in Argentina, 1 in Paraguay. We just had in January. But it's critical that this region find the commitment and the courage to do the right thing. When we were in Paraguay, it really blew up. It was on TV and front page of the newspaper for 3 days in a row because there were many issues down there. We see it's black and white. There are people who are with us, and there's people who are playing games who want the status quo. And we are going to strengthen the hand of those who are with us and support them. So thank you, Joseph. Thank you for this great effort to honor those victims, to honor Argentina, and President Macri, to honor this great gentleman. And thank you for making the effort to come up here. You're a tremendous person. God bless you.
Well, with that, very, very, very powerful remarks by Congressman Pittenger. We do end our program for today. We do not end our program at the center. We're going to be doing a lot more on this issue. This is an ongoing issue for us. We've been dealing with this and working, researching, investigating, and presenting about this going on for 8 years now. I'd like to thank all our speakers, especially Congressman Petri from coming up from Argentina, but Congressman Duncan, Senator Cruz, John Cronin, Hugo Cha, Congressman Pittenger, my panel, and everybody that's been involved to make an effort to, I know we packed a lot in for today, but I think that it was a very productive session. I'd also like to thank all of you, the audience, especially those that have stayed the whole entire time for the 3 hours. This is not every day that we get to sit together in the Senate and to talk about this issue. There's not every day that something such as a 25th anniversary comes about. So I think this has been a very special occasion, and I thank you for being with us today. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our co-sponsors, the Middle East Forum, the American Foreign Policy Council, Fuente Latina, and the Foreign Desk, who in each and their own way are involved in this effort, have been engaged in this, whether it's through the media, policy, or activism, or any other effort that they are taking. We consider ourselves a team, and there's many other think tanks and academics and individuals involved in this that not everybody could be here or not everybody could be packed in 3 hours. So we are also thankful to them. We will hopefully include them in future programs. And lastly, and certainly not least, let me thank my team. My job is the easiest. I just get up here and speak. They put everything together, and when everything comes from the logistics to organizing the speakers, to organizing the media and everybody else that can come so that we can have a productive 3 hours. My team, our board, has been instrumental in all this, and we hope that you're proud of our efforts and continue to support our efforts moving forward. So with that, as they say in Congress, we are adjourned, and you are dismissed. So thank you for everything.
Thank you. We'll work together. Yes.